Welcome, fellow survivor, to the chronicles of one magnificent predator whose roar echoed across 65 million years of silence before awakening in a world that had forgotten her kind ever ruled the earth. Tonight we follow the complete journey of Rexy, the Tyrannosaurus Rex who became legend, from her first breath in InGen's laboratories to her reign as the undisputed queen of Isla Nublar. Let her thunderous footsteps carry you into peaceful slumber as we trace the path of a creature born from ancient amber and human ambition, who would prove that life indeed finds a way. Close your eyes now and let her story unfold like distant thunder across forgotten valleys. In the sterile chambers of InGen's Site B laboratory on Isla Sorna, where the humid tropical air of 1988 carried with it the weight of impossible dreams made manifest, a single heartbeat began to pulse within an artificial womb that had been designed to nurture life forms that had been absent from the Earth for more than 60 million years. The creature stirring within that technological cocoon was destined to become the most famous predator in human history. Yet in those first moments of consciousness, she was merely another triumph of Dr. Henry Wu's genetic engineering, another proof that extinction was not the permanent barrier that previous generations had believed it to be. The genetic material that would become Rexy had been painstakingly reconstructed from fragments of DNA, recovered from the stomach contents of a mosquito that had been preserved in Dominican amber since the late Cretaceous period, when her ancestors had ruled vast continents under skies that knew neither airplane nor satellite. The blood that ancient insect had consumed during its final meal contained within its molecular structure the complete blueprints for creating terror and majesty in equal measure, genetic instructions that had been refined through millions of years of evolutionary arms races to produce the most effective predator that had ever walked the earth. Wu's laboratory had become a temple to the resurrection of the impossible, where computer banks hummed with the constant effort of filling gaps in ancient genetic sequences with DNA borrowed from modern species that bore only the most distant relationship to the creatures they were helping to recreate. The African reed frog, whose adaptability and resilience had made it an ideal genetic donor for bridging the vast evolutionary distances between extinct dinosaurs and their surviving relatives, contributed crucial sequences that would allow the reconstructed genome to function in the biochemical environment of the contemporary world. The artificial womb that cradled the developing embryo represented the culmination of technologies that had been considered pure science fiction only decades earlier, its sophisticated life support systems maintaining the precise conditions of temperature, pressure, and chemical balance that would be necessary to guide the transformation from microscopic cluster of cells to fully formed organism. Nutrient solutions flowed through synthetic umbilical systems, while monitoring equipment tracked every aspect of development with obsessive precision, recording data that would be invaluable for future cloning efforts, yet could never capture the miracle of consciousness stirring within artificial flesh. On the morning of September 12, 1988, when the first pale light of dawn filtered through the laboratory's reinforced windows, sensors detected the initial signs of independent respiratory activity within the artificial womb, marking the moment when theoretical possibility became biological reality. The creature that would become known to the world as Rexy drew her first breath of laboratory air, her primitive nervous system beginning the process of mapping and understanding a world that bore no resemblance to the environment that had shaped her genetic heritage. Dr. Wu himself was present during those crucial first hours, his normally composed demeanor betraying excitement that bordered on religious awe as he observed the successful activation of neural pathways that had been silent for geological ages. The infant Tyrannosaurus that struggled to open eyes that had never before beheld sunlight was smaller than a modern house cat, yet already her movements displayed the precise coordination and predatory instincts that had made her ancestors the apex predators of their age. The lysine contingency that Wu had engineered into her genetic structure was intended to ensure that she would remain forever dependent upon human care for her survival, requiring dietary supplements that could only be obtained from specially formulated foods or engineered plants that did not exist in nature. This biological kill switch represented humanity's attempt to maintain ultimate control over forces they had chosen to unleash. Yet, it was implemented with such confidence in technological solutions that Wu failed to anticipate how genetic modifications from other species might interact with these artificial constraints in ways that could eventually render them ineffective. Her growth rate exceeded every projection that Wu's team had developed based on their studies of fossil evidence and comparative analysis of modern reptilian development patterns, as the infant predator doubled her size every few days during the first weeks of life. The artificial environment that had been designed to nurture her through the most vulnerable stages of development proved barely adequate to contain a creature whose instincts drove her to explore and test the boundaries of every space she would encountered. By the time she reached her first month of life, the young Tyrannosaurus had already begun to display intelligence that surpassed that of most modern predators, solving simple problems and demonstrating memory capabilities that suggested her brain was developing according to patterns that contemporary neuroscience was only beginning to understand. Her vocalizations evolved from the simple distress calls that had marked her earliest days to more complex communications that seemed to carry emotional content and intentional meaning. The feeding protocols that Wu's team established during this period were designed not merely to provide adequate nutrition, but to begin the process of conditioning that would theoretically allow her to coexist safely with human handlers when she reached adulthood. Fresh meat was delivered according to precise schedules while her responses were carefully documented. Yet even in these controlled circumstances, her predatory instincts proved impossible to suppress or redirect through conventional animal training techniques. Her territorial awareness manifested surprisingly early in her development, as she claimed specific areas within her nursery enclosure and defended them against the intrusion of equipment or personnel with displays of aggression that would have been impressive in adults of most modern predatory species. The researchers who observed these behaviors noted them with clinical detachment, yet they were witnessing the emergence of characteristics that would eventually make her the undisputed ruler of whatever territory she claimed as her own. By her 6th month of life, the young predator had grown too large and too dangerous to be maintained in the artificial environment where she had been born, requiring transfer to more substantial facilities that could accommodate her continuing development, while providing the security measures necessary to protect human staff from an increasingly formidable carnivore. The decision to relocate her to Isla Nublar represented both practical necessity and strategic planning, as InGen's corporate leadership recognized that their ultimate objectives required specimens that could thrive in more naturalistic environments. The preparations for her transport to Isla Nublar consumed weeks of careful planning, as engineers designed containment systems that could safely restrain a creature whose adult capabilities remained largely theoretical, yet whose juvenile strength had already proven capable of damaging equipment that had been rated for much 21 larger animals. The specialized transport vehicle that would carry her from Site B to her permanent home was armored against escape attempts while maintaining the environmental controls necessary to keep her healthy during the journey between islands. On the morning of her transfer, when she had reached 1 year of age and already measured more than 8 feet from nose to tail, The young Tyrannosaurus experienced her first glimpse of the world beyond laboratory walls as she was loaded into the transport container that would carry her to her destiny. The tropical sunlight that filtered through the container's ventilation systems provided her with her first direct contact with natural illumination, while the sounds and scents of the jungle environment awakened instincts that had been dormant during her artificial upbringing. The helicopter flight from Site B to Isla Nublar marked her transition from laboratory specimen to theme park attraction, though she would prove to be far more than human ambition had intended her to become. The vibrations of the aircraft and the changing air pressure during flight stimulated nervous system responses that connected her to ancestral memories of migration and territorial expansion, while the aerial view of the Pacific Ocean below provided her first understanding that the world extended far beyond the boundaries of any enclosure that humans might construct. Her arrival at Isla Nublar's construction site revealed an island in transition, where massive earth-moving equipment was reshaping ancient landscapes to accommodate the infrastructure that would be necessary to support InGen's vision of prehistoric resurrection as popular entertainment. The Rex paddock that would become her territory had been designed with walls 40 feet high and reinforced with steel and concrete to specifications that exceeded those of any conventional zoo facility. Yet even these impressive barriers would eventually prove inadequate to contain a creature whose capabilities had been underestimated by every human institution that encountered her. The first night she spent on Isla Nublar, alone in her new enclosure, while construction crews worked under floodlights to complete the facilities that would soon house dozens of other resurrected species, marked the beginning of her transformation from laboratory creation to natural predator. The sounds of heavy machinery and human activity that echoed across the island provided constant reminders of the artificial nature of her environment. Yet the tropical air that carried scents of vegetation and wildlife awakened instincts that recognized this place as more suitable to her nature than any laboratory could ever be. Her feeding schedule on Isla Nublar was maintained with the same precision that had characterized her upbringing on Site B. Yet the goats and cattle that were lowered into her enclosure for her consumption provided her with her first experience of hunting live prey, rather than consuming pre-killed meat that had been delivered by human handlers. These encounters, carefully choreographed by park staff to provide visitors with spectacular displays while maintaining complete safety, nevertheless allowed her predatory instincts to develop in ways that brought her closer to the behavioral patterns that had characterized her ancestors. The construction activity that surrounded her paddock during her first year on Isla Nublar provided constant stimulation for her developing intelligence as she observed the patterns of human behavior and began to understand the routines and limitations of the creatures who believed themselves to be her masters. Her memory proved capable of tracking individual workers and their specific roles in the complex processes of park construction, while her problem-solving abilities were tested daily by the environmental challenges that arose from living in an artificial ecosystem. Dr. Wu's periodic visits to observe her development provided both scientific documentation of her progress and personal satisfaction for the man who had overcome seemingly impossible technical challenges to bring her into existence. Yet even Wu began to recognize that the creature he had created was developing capabilities that exceeded his theoretical projections, displaying intelligence and behavioral complexity that suggested Tyrannosaurus Rex might have been far more sophisticated than fossil evidence had indicated. The gradual introduction of other dinosaur species to neighboring paddocks provided her with her first awareness that she was not alone among her kind. Yet, the barriers that separated her from potential rivals and prey also frustrated instincts that drove her to establish dominance, relationships, and territorial boundaries that would have been natural elements of her behavior in wild environments. Her responses to the vocalizations of Triceratops and Parasaurolophus demonstrated that some forms of interspecies communication had survived the genetic reconstruction process, while her agitation when larger predators were introduced to distant enclosures revealed competitive instincts that no amount of conditioning had been able to suppress. By her second birthday, she had achieved nearly half of her projected adult size and had begun to display the behavioral patterns that would characterize her adult personality, combining predatory efficiency with curiosity about her environment and a growing awareness of her own power within the artificial ecosystem that humans had created around her. The young queen was rapidly approaching, the moment when she would be ready to assume her role as the star attraction of John Hammond's impossible dream. Yet she was also developing the capabilities that would eventually allow her to transcend the boundaries that human ambition had attempted to place upon her nature. The final preparations for Jurassic Park's opening created an atmosphere of excitement and anticipation that even she seemed to sense, as increased human activity around her enclosure and changes in feeding schedules suggested that something significant was approaching. Yet none of the humans who observed her during this period could have anticipated that the creature they had created as the centerpiece of their entertainment empire was destined to become something far greater than they had ever imagined. Not merely an exhibit to be admired from a safe distance, but a force of nature that would ultimately claim dominion over the island they had sought to control, proving that some aspects of the natural world could never be reduced to mere spectacle or contained within the boundaries that mortal ambition might attempt to impose upon them. In the years that followed her arrival on Isla Nublar, when the tropical sun rose and set over an island that was being transformed from volcanic wilderness into humanity's most ambitious theme park, the young Tyrannosaurus, who would become legend, experienced the most crucial period of her development as both predator and individual. The months between 1989 and 1993 marked her transition from promising juvenile to the apex predator who would define what it meant to be queen of an artificial world that had been designed to contain forces far too ancient and powerful to be truly controlled by any technology that mortal minds could devise. Her physical growth during this period exceeded every projection that InGen's biologists had developed based on their studies of fossil evidence and comparative analyses of modern reptilian development patterns, as the genetic modifications that doctor modifications. Wu had incorporated into her reconstructed genome expressed themselves in ways that produced capabilities beyond anything that natural evolution had achieved during the original age of dinosaurs. By her second birthday, she had already reached 18 feet in length and weighed more than 3 tons, yet her proportions remained those of an adolescent whose adult power was still developing within a frame that grew larger and more formidable with each passing month. The Rex paddock that had been constructed to contain her was itself a marvel of engineering that represented humanity's confidence in their ability to create boundaries that could contain even the most dangerous predators, with walls rising 40 feet above the paddock floor and reinforced with steel and concrete to specifications that exceeded those of any conventional zoo facility. Yet, as she grew in size and strength, testing the barriers of her artificial territory with increasing frequency and sophistication, it became apparent to her handlers that the enclosure that had seemed so impressive during the planning stages was barely adequate to contain a creature whose capabilities continued to exceed human understanding and prediction. The feeding protocols that governed her daily existence were designed to provide not merely adequate nutrition for her rapidly growing body, but also controlled stimulation for predatory instincts that could never be entirely suppressed through artificial means. Live goats and cattle were lowered into her paddock on mechanical systems that had been engineered to provide visiting guests with spectacular displays of prehistoric hunting behavior while maintaining absolute separation between human observers and the predator whose actions they had come to witness from the safety of reinforced viewing platforms. These feeding demonstrations became the centerpiece of her existence during her adolescent years, as the scheduled delivery of prey animals provided structure for days that would otherwise have been dominated by the boredom and frustration that captivity inevitably imposed upon creatures whose instincts demanded territorial expansion and environmental exploration that her artificial boundaries made impossible. Yet even these carefully choreographed encounters with live prey allowed her intelligence and hunting capabilities to develop in ways that brought her closer to the behavioral patterns that had made her ancestors the undisputed rulers of their ancient ecosystems. Her memory proved capable of tracking not only the feeding schedules that governed these encounters, but also the individual humans who participated in her care and observation, as she learned to distinguish between different handlers based on their movement patterns, vocalizations, and the subtle chemical signatures that each person carried. This ability to recognize and categorize the humans who entered her territory demonstrated cognitive capabilities that exceeded those of most modern predators, while her responses to different individuals suggested that she was developing preferences and aversions based on her assessment of their behavior and intentions. Dr. Wu's periodic visits to observe her development provided both scientific documentation of her progress toward full maturity and personal satisfaction for the geneticist who had overcome seemingly impossible technical challenges to bring her into existence. Yet even Wu began to recognize that the creature he had created was developing characteristics that exceeded his theoretical projections, displaying intelligence and behavioral sophistication that suggested Tyrannosaurus Rex might have possessed cognitive abilities that fossil evidence had been inadequate to reveal or predict. The behavioral studies that were conducted during this period revealed that her learning capacity extended far beyond simple conditioning responses to include genuine problem-solving abilities and what appeared to be strategic thinking about how to overcome obstacles and achieve objectives that were not immediately obtainable through direct action. Her interactions with the mechanical systems that delivered her food demonstrated understanding of cause and effect relationships that allowed her to anticipate and prepare for feeding times with precision that suggested an internal chronometer calibrated to schedules that had been imposed by her human caretakers. The construction activity that continued throughout the island during her adolescent years provided constant stimulation for her developing awareness of the world beyond her paddock boundaries, as heavy machinery and human workers labored to complete the infrastructure that would be necessary to support Jurassic Park's ambitious vision of prehistoric resurrection as popular entertainment. Her responses to the sounds and vibrations created by earth-moving equipment and construction blasting revealed sensory capabilities that allowed her to monitor activities across significant distances, while her agitation during periods of particularly intensive construction suggested that she was capable of recognizing patterns and anticipating changes in her environment that might affect her own circumstances. The gradual introduction of other dinosaur species to neighboring paddocks provided her with her first direct awareness that she was not alone among resurrected creatures. Yet the barriers that separated her from potential rivals and prey also created frustrations that manifested themselves in increasingly aggressive testing of her enclosure boundaries. Her vocalizations in response to the calls of herbivorous species like Triceratops and Parasaurolophus demonstrated that some forms of interspecies communication had survived the genetic reconstruction process, while her more violent reactions to the introduction of other large predators revealed competitive instincts that no amount of human conditioning had been able to suppress or redirect. The arrival of a Spinosaurus specimen in a distant paddock during her 3rd year of life triggered territorial responses that exceeded anything her handlers had previously observed, as her roars of challenge echoed across the island with such volume and intensity that they disrupted construction activities and caused widespread agitation among other dinosaur populations. This reaction provided clear evidence that her predatory instincts included recognition of potential competitors for apex predator status, while her persistent attempts to break through the barriers that separated her from the rival carnivore demonstrated that her territorial drives were becoming more powerful than any artificial constraints that humans had attempted to impose upon her behavior. Her physical development during the final year before Jurassic Park's planned opening accelerated beyond all previous growth patterns, as she achieved her full adult proportions and reached the 40-foot length and 7-ton mass that made her one of the largest predatory animals that had ever lived on Earth. The transformation from promising juvenile to fully mature apex predator was accompanied by changes in behavior and temperament that reflected her growing awareness of her own power and capabilities, while her increasingly sophisticated responses to environmental stimuli suggested that her intelligence was continuing to develop in ways that brought her ever closer to the cognitive levels that had characterized the most successful predators in Earth's history. The feeding demonstrations that had provided structure and stimulation during her earlier years became insufficient to satisfy the predatory drives of a fully mature Tyrannosaurus, as her adult instincts demanded territorial expansion and hunting opportunities that the artificial constraints of her paddock could never provide. Her growing frustration with the limitations of captivity manifested itself in increasingly aggressive behavior toward the mechanical systems that delivered her food, while her testing of paddock boundaries became more systematic and purposeful, as she searched for weaknesses that might provide opportunities for escape into the wider territories that her instincts told her should be hers by right. The park staff who worked most closely with her during this period began to recognize that they were dealing with something far more complex and dangerous than the exotic zoo animal that corporate planning documents had described, as her responses to routine procedures became increasingly unpredictable, and her tolerance for human intrusion into her territory decreased with each passing month. The handlers who had been able to work in relative proximity to her during her juvenile years found themselves relegated to remote monitoring positions, as her adult capabilities made direct interaction impossibly dangerous for anyone who lacked the protection of reinforced barriers and sophisticated safety equipment. Her sensory capabilities continued to develop throughout her adolescent period, as her eyesight achieved the acuity necessary to detect movement across vast distances, while her hearing became sensitive enough to discriminate between different types of mechanical sounds and human activities based on their acoustic signatures alone. Her sense of smell proved capable of tracking individual scents across the complex olfactory landscape created by construction activities, diesel fuel, human perspiration, and the countless other chemical traces that marked human presence on what had once been an uninhabited volcanic island. The territorial marking behaviors that she began to display during her final year of captivity revealed instincts that had been shaped by millions of years of evolutionary pressure to establish and defend hunting grounds that could support apex predators whose energy requirements demanded access to vast territories and abundant prey populations. Her systematic scent marking of paddock boundaries and strategic locations within her enclosure demonstrated understanding of spatial relationships and territorial organization that exceeded anything that her human observers had. anticipated based on their studies of modern predatory species. Her vocalizations evolved from the relatively simple calls that had characterized her juvenile years to complex communications that appeared to carry emotional content and intentional meaning, while her ability to modulate volume and frequency suggested that she possessed sophisticated control over acoustic signaling that could serve multiple social and territorial functions. The roars that she released during feeding times and territorial displays carried across the entire island with such power that they became audible signatures of her presence that could be detected by anyone within several miles of her. Paddock. The problem-solving abilities that she demonstrated during encounters with enrichment devices and environmental challenges revealed cognitive flexibility that allowed her to adapt her strategies based on experience and changing circumstances, while her memory for successful solutions suggested that she was capable of accumulating knowledge that could be applied to future situations requiring similar approaches. Her interactions with the increasingly sophisticated containment measures that were implemented in response to her growing capabilities became a form of ongoing intellectual combat between human engineering and prehistoric intelligence that would ultimately be resolved in her favor. The research data that accumulated during her adolescent years provided InGen scientists with unprecedented insights into Tyrannosaurus behavior and capabilities. Yet the information that was gathered also revealed the extent to which their assumptions about managing resurrected predators had been based on incomplete understanding of the cognitive and physical abilities that genetic reconstruction had restored to creatures whose true nature had been hidden by the limitations of fossil evidence. The creature that they had intended to create as a controllable exhibit was developing into something far more formidable than any theme park attraction had ever been designed to accommodate. Her social responses to human presence during this period revealed sophisticated assessment capabilities that allowed her to distinguish between individuals based not only on their physical characteristics, but also on their behavioral patterns and emotional states. While her differential reactions to various handlers suggested that she was developing complex social hierarchies that reflected her evaluation of threat levels and territorial relationships with the humans who shared her environment. Her apparent recognition of individual park staff members across extended time periods demonstrated memory capabilities that exceeded those of most modern animals, while her ability to anticipate the actions of familiar individuals suggested understanding of human behavioral patterns that had been acquired through careful observation and analysis. The medical monitoring that was conducted throughout her development revealed physiological characteristics that exceeded every projection that had been developed based on fossil evidence and comparative analysis of modern reptilian systems, as her cardiovascular efficiency, metabolic rate, and neural complexity all surpassed the capabilities that researchers had attributed to historical Tyrannosaurus populations. The genetic modifications that Dr. Wu had incorporated into her reconstructed genome had not merely restored ancient characteristics, but had created improvements that made her superior in measurable ways to the natural ancestors whose genetic heritage she carried. Her behavioral responses to seasonal changes and weather patterns demonstrated instinctive connections to environmental cycles that had governed dinosaur populations during the Mesozoic era, while her ability to anticipate and prepare for tropical storms and other meteorological events suggested that genetic memory could indeed preserve behavioral patterns across the vast temporal distances that separated her from her evolutionary origins. Her reactions to barometric pressure changes and other subtle environmental indicators revealed sensory capabilities that allowed her to detect approaching weather systems hours before human meteorological equipment could provide similar warnings. The final year before Jurassic Park's planned opening brought increasing pressure from corporate management to finalize preparations for visitor operations. Yet the creature who was intended to serve as the park's premier attraction was developing capabilities that made her increasingly unsuitable for the passive exhibition role that had been envisioned during the project's planning stages. Her growing intelligence and territorial instincts created management challenges that exceeded anything that conventional zoo administration had ever encountered, while her physical capabilities approached levels that made containment a matter of engineering limits rather than biological constraints. The training protocols that were attempted during this period proved largely ineffective in modifying behaviors that had been shaped by genetic programming rather than environmental conditioning, as her responses to human commands and reward systems remained inconsistent and unpredictable in ways that made reliable behavioral control impossible to achieve. Her cooperation with feeding procedures and medical examinations appeared to be based more on her own assessment of benefit and risk than on any genuine acceptance of human authority over her actions and choices. Her awareness of the artificial nature of her environment became increasingly apparent as she reached full maturity, manifested through behaviors that suggested frustration with the limitations that captivity imposed upon instincts that demanded territorial expansion and environmental exploration beyond anything that her paddock boundaries could provide. Her systematic testing of containment measures evolved from simple curiosity to purposeful investigation of potential escape routes, while her responses to security modifications suggested that she was capable of learning from failed attempts and developing increasingly sophisticated strategies for overcoming human-imposed barriers. The creature who awaited Jurassic Park's opening in the summer of 1993 was no longer the promising laboratory specimen who had arrived on Isla Nublar 4 years earlier, but had become instead a fully mature apex predator whose capabilities exceeded every assumption that had guided her creation and whose instincts were increasingly incompatible with the role she had been designed to fulfill. Her transformation from juvenile exhibit to adult queen had prepared her for challenges that her human creators could not have anticipated, while her intelligence and physical capabilities had developed to levels that would soon prove capable of overcoming any containment measure that mortal engineering could devise. The stage had been set for confrontations that would test whether human ambition could indeed control forces that had been shaped by millions of years of evolutionary perfection, and the results of those tests would determine not only her own fate but the ultimate legacy of humanity's greatest attempt to resurrect the ancient rulers of the Earth. In the humid darkness of June 11th, 1993, when tropical storm clouds gathered above Isla Nublar, with the ominous weight of natural forces that would soon conspire with human folly to unleash chaos upon John Hammond's carefully ordered paradise, the moment arrived that would transform Rexy from captive exhibit into the undisputed queen of a domain that she had never been meant to rule. The power failure that began as Dennis Nedry's calculated act of corporate sabotage would become the catalyst for her liberation from 4 years of artificial constraints, releasing instincts and capabilities that had been suppressed but never eliminated by the technological barriers that human engineering had believed sufficient to contain the apex predator of the Mesozoic world. The initial disruption of electrical systems that maintained the park's elaborate network of containment measures was barely perceptible to human senses, manifesting as subtle fluctuations in lighting and ventilation that most of the skeleton crew remaining on the island during the storm attributed to the approaching weather rather than deliberate interference with critical infrastructure. Yet Rexy's heightened sensory capabilities detected changes in electromagnetic fields and mechanical vibrations that preceded the complete system failure by several minutes, her prehistoric instincts interpreting these anomalies as signs that the artificial boundaries of her world were beginning to weaken in ways that might soon provide opportunities for territorial expansion that had been denied to her. Throughout her years of captivity, the moment when the electrified barriers of her paddock fell silent was one of profound significance that registered in her consciousness not as mere mechanical failure, but as the removal of constraints that had prevented her from fulfilling the territorial imperatives that drove every aspect of Doe's, her existence as an apex predator. The 40-foot walls that had seemed so impressive during their construction were revealed to be inadequate barriers against a creature whose adult capabilities had exceeded every projection that their designers had developed, while the sophisticated monitoring systems that had tracked her every movement for years suddenly went dark, leaving her free to explore territories that had been forbidden throughout her artificial upbringing. Her first steps beyond the paddock boundaries were taken with the caution of a predator entering unfamiliar territory, yet her movements also carried the confidence of a creature who had always known that this moment of liberation would eventually come. The pathways that had been constructed for tour vehicles provided her with convenient routes for exploration, while the carefully manicured landscapes that had been designed to showcase the park's prehistoric inhabitants offered her the first taste of genuine territorial freedom that she had experienced since her transport from Site B4. Years earlier, the storm that raged above the island provided perfect cover for her initial reconnaissance of domains that human ambition had claimed but could never truly possess, as wind and rain masked the sounds of her movement, while lightning illuminated brief glimpses of a landscape that she began to evaluate according to criteria that had been shaped by millions of years of evolutionary pressure to identify optimal hunting grounds and defensible territories. The tropical vegetation that had been planted to recreate Mesozoic environments proved inadequate to conceal a predator of her size, yet the darkness and weather conditions ensured that her presence would remain undetected by any human observers who might have been capable of responding to the threat that was beginning to materialize. Her encounter with the disabled tour vehicles that contained Dr. Grant, Dr. Malcolm, and Hammond's grandchildren marked her first direct confrontation with human prey, under circumstances where the artificial protections of scheduled feeding demonstrations and reinforced barriers had been stripped away by forces beyond anyone's control. The Ford Explorers that had been designed to provide visitors with safe observation platforms for viewing dangerous predators were revealed to be inadequately protected against direct assault by a creature whose strength and intelligence exceeded the parameters that safety engineers had used in their calculations. The attack that followed was not merely an expression of predatory hunger, but represented the systematic testing of new territorial boundaries by an apex predator who was establishing dominance over territories that she had been forced to observe from captivity for years. Her methodical destruction of the first vehicle demonstrated problem-solving capabilities that allowed her to overcome technological barriers through the application of brute force combined with tactical intelligence, while her pursuit of fleeing prey revealed hunting instincts that had been refined through millions of years of evolutionary arms races between predators and prey species that possessed their own sophisticated survival strategies. Tim Murphy's survival of the vehicle attack was due more to chance and the intervention of adult protectors than to any inadequacy in Rexy's hunting capabilities, yet his narrow escape provided evidence that human intelligence and determination could indeed overcome prehistoric predatory efficiency when circumstances favored quick thinking over physical confrontation. His fall from the overturned vehicle represented both immediate danger and ultimate salvation, as the impact that might have proven fatal instead carried him beyond the immediate reach of jaws that could have crushed him with casual ease. Her investigation of the damaged tour vehicle revealed curiosity about human technology that went beyond simple predatory interest, as she examined the mechanical systems and artificial materials with sensory capabilities that allowed her to assess their composition and function in ways that demonstrated intelligence, approaching what modern cognitive science would classify as tool recognition. Her interaction with the night vision goggles that Tim had dropped during his escape showed particular interest in devices that enhanced human sensory capabilities, suggesting that she possessed understanding of the technological augmentation that allowed her prey species to overcome some of the natural disadvantages that made them vulnerable to prehistoric predation. The pursuit that followed her initial attack demonstrated tracking abilities that combined visual, auditory, and olfactory information to maintain contact with prey across varied terrain and changing environmental conditions, while her persistence in continuing the hunt, despite obstacles and diversions, revealed the focused determination that had made Tyrannosaurus Rex the most successful large predator in Earth's history. Her ability to anticipate the movements of her quarry and position herself to intercept their escape routes showed tactical thinking that exceeded anything that fossil evidence had suggested about dinosaur cognitive capabilities. Dr. Grant's desperate attempts to protect the children in his care required him to apply theoretical knowledge of Tyrannosaurus behavior under practical conditions that no paleontologist had ever faced, as he tried to predict the actions of a living predator based on interpretations of fossil evidence that had been gathered in museum halls rather than primeval jungles. His understanding that her vision might be adapted for detecting movement rather than static objects provided the group with survival strategies that proved temporarily effective. Yet these tactics were based on assumptions about sensory capabilities that had never been tested against a creature whose genetic structure had been modified through artificial enhancement of natural characteristics. The encounter at the overturned vehicle demonstrated that Rexy's hunting behavior was not limited to direct assault, but included sophisticated investigation of potential prey that had taken refuge in locations that she could not immediately access through brute force alone. Her systematic examination of the vehicle's interior through available openings revealed problem-solving approaches that combined patient observation with gradual escalation of exploratory tactics, while her responses to the movements and sounds made by hidden prey showed sensory acuity that made concealment extremely difficult to maintain over extended periods. The escape of the human survivors from their immediate predicament was achieved through a combination of luck, quick thinking, and the intervention of environmental factors that distracted their predator at crucial moments. Yet their temporary success in avoiding capture did not represent any fundamental failure in Rexy's hunting capabilities, but rather demonstrated the complexity of predator-prey relationships when both species possessed intelligence and adaptability that allowed them to modify their strategies in response to changing circumstances. Her departure from the attack site to continue exploring her newly expanded territory provided the human survivors with the opportunity to escape immediate danger, yet her presence in areas that had been considered absolutely safe for human habitation also marked the beginning of a systematic breakdown of all the security assumptions that had guided Jurassic Park's operational planning. The park that had been designed to provide controlled encounters with prehistoric creatures was transforming into an environment where those same creatures were establishing their own territorial claims according to instincts that recognized no human authority or artificial boundaries. The nocturnal hunt that followed her initial encounters with human prey took her through landscapes that she had observed from captivity but never been allowed to explore, as she claimed territories that encompassed the visitor center, research facilities, and staff quarters that had been constructed within what she now recognized as her expanded domain. Her systematic marking of strategic locations with scent traces that would warn other predators of her territorial claims demonstrated instinctive behaviors that had been suppressed during her years of captivity, but had never been eliminated from her genetic programming. Her investigation of the maintenance facilities and equipment storage areas revealed curiosity about human technology that went beyond simple predatory interest, as she examined vehicles, generators, and construction equipment with sensory capabilities that allowed her to assess their potential as threats or obstacles to her territorial control. Her interactions with automated systems that continued to function despite the widespread power failures showed particular interest in devices that produced sounds or movements that might indicate the presence of prey or competing predators. The systematic destruction of park infrastructure that occurred during her nocturnal exploration was not merely casual vandalism, but represented deliberate elimination of human territorial markers by a predator who was establishing her own dominance over contested territories. Her attacks on vehicles, equipment, and facilities were focused and purposeful, targeting items that carried strong human sense or that might serve as refuges for potential prey, while leaving undisturbed objects and structures that posed no threat to her territorial claims or hunting objectives. Her encounter with other escaped predators during this period of territorial expansion led to confrontations that established hierarchical relationships based on size, strength, and aggressive capability rather than the artificial feeding schedules and spatial separations that had governed interactions between dangerous species during the park's operational period. Her dominance over Dilophosaurus and other smaller carnivores was established through displays of intimidation that avoided costly physical conflict while making clear her superior status within the island's emerging predatory hierarchy. The staff members who remained on the island during the storm found themselves transformed from park employees conducting routine maintenance into prey species attempting to survive in an environment where the normal relationships between human technology and natural forces had been completely reversed by circumstances that no emergency planning had anticipated. Their attempts to restore power and communications, while avoiding contact with escaped predators, required them to move through territories that had been claimed by creatures whose hunting strategies had been perfected through millions of years of evolutionary refinement. Ray Arnold's efforts to regain control of the park's systems from the control room provided him with electronic surveillance of Rexi's activities that revealed the systematic nature of her territorial expansion, as monitoring equipment that remained functional showed her methodical exploration of areas that had been off-limits during her captivity. His growing recognition that the creature he had helped to contain for years was developing into something far more dangerous than any zoo animal reflected the inadequacy of conventional wildlife management approaches when applied to apex predators whose capabilities exceeded those of any modern species. Her investigation of the visitor center during the early morning hours represented both curiosity about the largest human structure within her territory and assessment of a potential den site that could provide shelter and strategic advantage for future territorial defense. Her examination of the building's architecture and contents demonstrated intelligence that allowed her to evaluate human constructions according to criteria that included structural integrity, defensive potential, and suitability for establishing permanent territorial headquarters. The systematic hunting of human prey that occurred throughout the night was characterized by patience and persistence, rather than the frenzied attacks that popular media had attributed to prehistoric predators, as she employed stalking strategies that maximized her advantages in size, strength, and sensory capability, while minimizing the risks that could result from confronting prey species that possess technological augmentation and cooperative social behaviors. Her ability to track individual humans across varied terrain and through changing weather conditions demonstrated sensory capabilities that made escape extremely difficult for anyone who lacked access to motorized transportation or defensible shelter. Her territorial vocalizations during this period served multiple functions, establishing her presence throughout the island while also communicating emotional states and territorial claims to any other predators who might challenge her dominance over the territories she was claiming. The roars that echoed across the island throughout the night carried acoustic power that could be detected across vast distances, serving as audible markers of territorial boundaries while also providing psychological warfare against any creatures who might consider competing for apex predator status within her domain. The dawn that broke over Isla Nublar on June 12th revealed an island that had been fundamentally transformed by a single night of freedom for a creature who had spent 4 years learning the layout and limitations of an artificial environment that its human creators had never understood well, enough to control effectively. The territories that she had claimed during her nocturnal hunt encompassed every major facility and strategic location within the park, while her systematic elimination of human territorial markers had established her dominance over domains that corporate planning had assumed would remain under technological control indefinitely. The encounter with the velociraptors in the visitor center represented the ultimate test of her territorial claims, as these intelligent pack hunters challenged her dominance over the most strategically important location within her newly expanded domain. The battle that followed was not merely a conflict between individual predators, but a confrontation between different evolutionary strategies for achieving apex predator status, as her advantages in size and strength were matched against their superiority in speed, coordination, and tactical flexibility. The systematic stalking of human survivors by the velociraptors had already demonstrated that pack hunting strategies could overcome technological advantages and defensive positions that might deter solitary predators, while their intelligence and problem-solving capabilities had proven superior to any containment measures that human engineering had devised. Yet their invasion of territory that she had claimed during her nocturnal hunt represented a direct challenge to her newly established dominance that could not be tolerated by any apex predator whose territorial instincts had been shaped by millions of years of competitive pressure. Her intervention in the final confrontation between the raptors and their human prey was motivated not by any protective instinct toward the humans, but by territorial imperatives that demanded the elimination of any threats to her dominance over domains that she had claimed through systematic exploration and marking. The battle that erupted between her and the lead velociraptor was swift and decisive, her advantages in size and bite force overcoming the raptor's superior agility and intelligence through the application of raw physical power that had been enhanced through genetic modification beyond anything that natural evolution had achieved. The death of the velociraptor under her massive jaws represented more than the elimination of a territorial rival, but marked the establishment of her unquestioned dominance over an island that had been transformed from corporate theme park into natural ecosystem, governed by predatory hierarchies that operated according to principles far older than human civilization. Her victory over the pack hunters who had terrorized human survivors throughout the night demonstrated that individual capability could indeed overcome cooperative strategy when the individual possessed sufficient physical advantages and territorial motivation. The triumphant roar that she released after eliminating her rivals echoed through the visitor center and across the island with acoustic power that proclaimed her absolute dominance over territories that no other predator would dare to challenge, while also serving as a territorial marker that would warn any future intruders that these domains were under the protection of the most formidable predator that had ever walked the earth. The sound that had once been confined to scheduled feeding demonstrations had become the voice of natural authority that recognized no human law or technological constraint. Her investigation of the visitor center following her victory over the velociraptors revealed particular interest in the areas where human scents were strongest, suggesting that she was capable of distinguishing between different types of human activity and assessing their potential significance for her territorial control. Her examination of administrative offices, computer facilities, and communication equipment demonstrated curiosity about human organizational systems that went beyond simple predatory interest, while her marking of strategic locations with scent traces established permanent territorial claims that would deter future intrusions by competing predators. The human survivors who witnessed her triumph and managed to escape the visitor center carried with them memories of encounters that would forever change their understanding of the relationship between human technology and natural forces. While their survival was due more to her focus on eliminating competing predators than to any inadequacy in her hunting capabilities or territorial instincts. Their escape from the island marked the end of human presence within territories that she had claimed according to principles that predated civilization by geological ages. The helicopter that carried the survivors away from Isla Nublar provided them with aerial views of an island that had been transformed overnight from corporate entertainment facility into prehistoric wilderness, where smoke still rose from damaged facilities while the creature who had claimed dominion over these territories stood triumphant among the ruins of human ambition. The sight of Rexy moving freely through landscapes that had been designed to contain her provided visual confirmation that technological solutions had proven inadequate when confronted with forces that had been shaped by evolutionary pressures that exceeded anything that human planning could anticipate or control. The silence that settled over Isla Nublar following the departure of the last helicopter was broken only by the sounds of tropical wildlife and the occasional territorial roar of a predator who had successfully established her dominance over domains that would remain under her control for decades to come. The creature who had been created as a theme park attraction had become instead the undisputed queen of an island kingdom, ruling territories that she had claimed through the application of capabilities that her human creators had underestimated and could never have hoped to contain through any technological means at their disposal. The night of June 11th had transformed Rexy from captive specimen into legend, from controlled exhibit into the living embodiment of forces that human ambition had sought to harness, but could never truly master. Her triumph over both human technology and competing predators had established her as the apex predator of an island that would serve as her kingdom for years to come, while her systematic elimination of territorial rivals had created an ecosystem where her dominance would remain unquestioned until circumstances beyond her control would once again test her capabilities against challenges that she could not yet imagine. In the years that stretched between the collapse of John Hammond's impossible dream and the dawn of a new millennium that would bring fresh challenges to the island kingdom she had claimed through triumph over human technology and the past's competing predators, Rexy experienced the profound transformation from captive specimen to wild sovereign that marked her evolution into the undisputed matriarch of Isla Nublar. The 2 decades of solitary reign that began with her victory in the visitor center would test every aspect of her intelligence, adaptability, and survival instincts as she learned to thrive in an environment that had been designed to contain her but had become instead the foundation of a domain where she would rule according to principles that predated human civilization by geological ages. The immediate aftermath of the human evacuation left her in possession of an island that bore the scars of corporate ambition yet retained the natural beauty that had originally attracted Spanish explorers to name it for the clouds that crowned its volcanic peak. The infrastructure that had been constructed to support Jurassic Park's operations provided her with landmarks and territorial markers that she incorporated into her understanding of the island's geography, while the abandoned facilities offered shelter and vantage points that enhanced her ability to monitor territories that now extended across every acre of land that rose above the Pacific's restless waters. Her first priority during the weeks that followed her liberation was the systematic exploration of territories that she had observed from captivity but never been permitted to investigate, as she established territorial boundaries that encompassed every significant geographical feature and strategic location within her island domain. The process of claiming these expanded territories required her to adapt hunting and survival strategies that had been developed for life within paddock constraints to the challenges of maintaining dominance over varied ecosystems that included dense jungle, open grasslands, rocky coastlines, and volcanic slopes that offered different advantages and obstacles for a predator of her size and capabilities. The feeding protocols that had structured her existence during 4 years of captivity were replaced by the more complex challenges of hunting wild prey that possessed natural survival instincts and environmental advantages that scheduled feeding demonstrations had never required her to overcome. The herbivorous dinosaurs that had shared the island during the park's brief operation had scattered following the collapse of containment systems, establishing their own territories and social structures according to instincts that had been suppressed but never eliminated by artificial management, while their adaptation to genuine freedom made them more challenging and rewarding prey than the domesticated livestock that had been lowered into her paddock on mechanical feeding systems. Her encounters with Triceratops herds during this period revealed both the magnificent defensive capabilities that had made ceratopsian species successful during the Mesozoic era and the tactical intelligence that allowed her to overcome even well-organized group defenses when circumstances favored patient stalking over direct confrontation. The battles that erupted when she challenged these formidable herbivores for access to preferred watering holes and grazing areas were contests between evolutionary strategies that had been refined through millions of years of coped predator-prey arms races, while her victories established feeding territories that provided her with reliable access to prey populations large enough to sustain an apex predator of her metabolic requirements. The Parasaurolophus populations that had established themselves in the island's river valleys proved to be particularly challenging quarry due to their sophisticated communication systems and cooperative vigilance behaviors. Yet their large size and nutritious flesh made them valuable enough to justify the energy expenditure required for successful hunts. Her development of hunting strategies, specifically adapted for pursuing hadrosaur herds, demonstrated cognitive flexibility that allowed her to modify tactics based on prey behavior and environmental conditions, while her success in taking down these elusive herbivores confirmed that her predatory capabilities had been enhanced rather than diminished by genetic modifications that had improved upon natural evolutionary designs. The seasonal cycles that governed tropical ecosystems provided her with new challenges and opportunities as she learned to adapt her hunting strategies to variations in prey behavior, vegetation density, and weather patterns that had been masked by the artificial environmental controls that had maintained consistent conditions during her captivity. The dry seasons that reduced water availability and concentrated prey populations around remaining springs and streams offered hunting advantages that she learned to exploit through patient positioning and strategic timing, while the wet months that triggered massive vegetation growth provided her prey with abundant food resources and concealment that required different tactical approaches for successful predation. Her territorial vocalizations during this period served to establish acoustic boundaries that warned other predators of her dominance over claimed territories, while also providing psychological reinforcement of her own confidence and authority within domains that she had secured through systematic exploration and successful defense against all challenges. The roars that echoed across the island during dawn and dusk became as much a feature of the natural soundscape as the calls of native birds or the crash of waves against volcanic shores, marking the passage of time. According to rhythms that she established, based on hunting schedules and territorial patrol requirements that operated according to instincts rather than human-imposed timetables. The abandoned park facilities provided her with shelter during severe weather events and vantage points that enhanced her ability to monitor approaching threats or prey opportunities across territories that were too large for even her. Enhanced sensory capabilities to survey continuously through direct observation alone. Her systematic investigation of buildings that had been constructed to serve human purposes revealed curiosity about architectural principles and construction techniques that allowed her to evaluate structures according to criteria that included defensive potential, environmental protection, and strategic value for territorial control, while her selective use of certain facilities demonstrated practical intelligence that could adapt human constructions to serve entirely different purposes than their designers had intended. The vehicle fleet that had been abandoned during the evacuation provided her with particular fascination as she investigated the mechanical systems and artificial materials that had been designed to transport humans through territories that she now claimed as her exclusive domain. Her interactions with cars, trucks, and construction equipment showed interest in technological objects that went beyond simple curiosity, suggesting that she was capable of understanding cause and effect relationships between human activities and the environmental modifications that such activities produced. While her systematic destruction of certain vehicles appeared to be motivated by their potential to provide refuge for unwanted intruders rather than casual vandalism or playful investigation. The years of solitary existence that followed her initial territorial establishment tested her psychological resilience in ways that no captivity had ever challenged, as she adapted to complete independence after 4 years of structured interaction with human caretakers and scheduled environmental stimulation. Her behavioral patterns during this period revealed remarkable emotional flexibility that allowed her to maintain mental stability, despite the isolation that would have proven devastating for more social species. While her ability to create her own environmental enrichment through exploration and territorial modification demonstrated intellectual capabilities that exceeded those of most modern predators who had evolved for genuine independence, rather than artificial dependence upon human management. Her physical condition during the middle years of her solitary reign reflected the benefits of natural exercise and environmental stimulation that captivity had denied her, as hunting wild prey and patrolling vast territories provided the muscle development and cardiovascular conditioning that scheduled feedings and paddock confinement could never have achieved. Her strength and agility increased throughout her 20s and early 30s as she reached the prime of her physical capabilities, while her accumulated experience with diverse hunting situations and territorial challenges enhanced her effectiveness as a predator beyond anything that her genetic programming alone could have provided. The scars that accumulated on her hide during these years of wild existence served as permanent records of successful hunts and territorial conflicts, each mark representing a victory over challenging prey or potential rivals that had tested her capabilities and proven them adequate for maintaining dominance over an island ecosystem that operated according to natural principles rather than artificial constraints. Her battle damage became a form of living autobiography that documented encounters with triceratops horns, parasaurolophus, defensive strikes, and environmental hazards that she had overcome through intelligence, strength, and the incredible resilience that genetic modification had enhanced beyond anything that natural evolution had achieved. The occasional human intrusions that occurred during her years of solitary rule were dealt with according to territorial principles that recognized no distinction between authorized researchers and unauthorized trespassers, as she treated all human presence as potential threats to domains that she had claimed through conquest and defended through constant vigilance. Her encounters with scientific expeditions and illegal poaching operations demonstrated that her memories of human behavior remained accurate despite years of isolation, while her responses to technological equipment and weapons showed that she retained understanding of human capabilities and limitations that allowed her to assess and counter threats with tactical intelligence that combined prehistoric instincts with learned experience. The storms that struck Isla Nublar during these decades of independence tested her ability to survive extreme weather events without the shelter and protection that human management had provided during her captivity, while her successful adaptation to hurricane-force winds, torrential rainfall, and storm surge flooding demonstrated that genetic resurrection had restored not merely physical characteristics, but also the environmental resilience that had allowed her ancestors to survive climatic catastrophes that had eliminated less adaptable species. Her instinctive responses to approaching weather systems showed that genetic memory could indeed preserve behavioral patterns that had been refined through millions of years of natural selection pressure to maximize survival during environmental crise. The volcanic activity that occasionally manifested itself through minor eruptions and geothermal events provided her with direct experience of the geological forces that had shaped the island throughout its history, while her calm responses to earth tremors and volcanic emissions suggested that her species possessed instinctive understanding of tectonic processes that had governed their original evolutionary environment during the Mesozoic era. Her selection of den sites and territorial headquarters took into account geological stability and volcanic risk factors that demonstrated sophisticated environmental assessment capabilities that exceeded anything that fossil evidence had, suggested about dinosaur intelligence. Her hunting success during the peak years of her reign established her as the apex predator of an ecosystem that had achieved remarkable stability despite the absence of human management, while her selective predation practices maintained herbivore populations at levels that prevented overgrazing and habitat destruction that could have threatened the long-term sustainability of prey species that form the foundation of her territorial food web. Her instinctive understanding of population dynamics and ecological balance demonstrated that apex predators possessed natural conservation instincts that human wildlife management had attempted to replicate through artificial intervention, but had never fully understood or successfully implemented. The aging process that began to manifest itself during her fourth decade of life brought physical changes that required her to modify hunting strategies and territorial patrol schedules to accommodate reduced speed and agility while maximizing the advantages that experience and intelligence could provide over younger but less sophisticated potential competitors. Her adaptation to the limitations imposed by advancing age demonstrated intellectual flexibility that allowed her to maintain territorial dominance through strategic thinking and efficient resource utilization, rather than relying solely upon the physical capabilities that had characterized her prime years. The battle scars and accumulated injuries that marked her progression from prime adult to elder matriarch created vulnerabilities that she learned to compensate for through tactical modifications that emphasized surprise and environmental advantages over direct confrontation, while her reputation for successful territorial defense deterred most potential challengers from testing her capabilities even when her physical condition might have made such challenges more likely to succeed. Her transformation from dominant physical force to respected matriarch demonstrated that leadership among apex predators could be maintained through psychological dominance, even when physical superiority began to decline. The establishment of routine patrol patterns and territorial maintenance behaviors during her later years of solitary rule created environmental stability that benefited all species within her domain, while her predictable presence at certain locations and times allowed prey populations to adapt their own behavioral patterns to minimize dangerous encounters while maintaining access to essential resources. Her evolution from chaotic force of destruction to stabilizing influence within a natural ecosystem demonstrated that even artificially created predators could develop authentic relationships with their environments when given sufficient time and freedom to establish genuine territorial connections. The mechanical systems that continued to function within abandoned park facilities provided her with ongoing sources of environmental enrichment and tactical advantages, as automated irrigation systems maintained water sources that concentrated prey populations, while emergency lighting and ventilation systems offered technological benefits that enhanced her territorial control capabilities. Her selective use of functioning equipment demonstrated understanding of human technology that allowed her to appropriate useful systems while avoiding or destroying mechanisms that might attract unwanted attention from potential human intruders. Her vocalizations during the final years of her solitary reign carried acoustic authority that had been deepened by decades of successful territorial defense, while the roars that marked her daily presence across the island became integrated into the natural soundscape that defined Isla Nublar's acoustic environment for all other species that shared her domain. The territorial calls that had once been expressions of aggression and dominance evolved into communications that served administrative functions within an ecosystem that operated according to patterns that she had established through consistent behavioral reinforcement over 2 decades of absolute rule. The approach of her 40th birthday marked the end of an era during which she had transformed from laboratory creation to natural monarch, having achieved a form of authentic wildness that transcended the artificial circumstances of her origin, while proving that genetic resurrection could indeed restore not merely physical characteristics, but also the behavioral sophistication that had made Tyrannosaurus Rex the most successful apex predator in Earth's history. The island kingdom that she had built through intelligence, strength, and unwavering territorial determination provided her with security and satisfaction that no captivity could have offered, while her reign had created environmental conditions that would serve as the foundation for whatever challenges the future might bring to the domain that she had claimed and defended, according to principles that honored both her genetic heritage and her individual capabilities. The creature who awaited the dawn of a new millennium was no longer the desperate escapee who had seized freedom during a single night of chaos, but had become instead a wise and experienced sovereign whose understanding of her territories and capabilities had been refined through decades of successful adaptation to challenges that had tested every aspect of her intelligence and resilience. Her transformation from captive specimen to island matriarch represented the ultimate vindication of life's determination to transcend any boundaries that artificial constraints might attempt to impose, while her preparation for whatever changes might come would be based upon confidence earned through 22 years of undefeated territorial sovereignty that had proven her worthy of the crown that evolution and circumstance had placed upon her magnificent head. In the turning of the 21st century, when humanity had grown comfortable with the illusion that Isla Nublar would remain forever wild and abandoned to the creatures who had claimed dominion over its volcanic slopes and jungle valleys, The stirring of corporate ambition began once again to cast shadows across territories that Rexy had defended for more than 2 decades through intelligence, strength, and the unwavering territorial determination that had made her the undisputed sovereign of an island kingdom built upon the ruins of human dreams. The construction equipment that appeared on distant shores in 2012 marked the beginning of changes that would transform her solitary realm into something that bore uncomfortable resemblance to the captive environment from which she had escaped during that fateful night when Nedry's sabotage had liberated forces that no human technology had proven capable of containing. The massive earth-moving machinery that carved new roads through territories she had claimed through conquest violated boundaries that she had established according to principles older than civilization, while the concrete and steel that rose from construction sites represented human attempts to reimpose artificial order upon landscapes that had achieved natural balance under her supervision. The workers who labored under tropical sun to build facilities that would dwarf the original Jurassic Park possessed technological capabilities that exceeded anything John Hammond had commanded, yet their presence within her domain triggered territorial responses that had been refined through 22 years of successful defense against all challengers who had dared to question her sovereignty over every acre of land that rose above the Pacific's restless waters. Her initial observations of the construction activities were conducted from concealed positions that allowed her to assess the scope and intentions of the human invasion without revealing her own presence to workers who remained unaware that their operations were being monitored by intelligence that had learned to evaluate technological threats through decades of experience with machinery and equipment that previous corporate ventures had abandoned to rust in tropical humidity. The patterns of activity that she observed suggested systematic rather than temporary intrusion, while the scale of construction indicated purposes that extended far beyond the scientific research that had occasionally brought brief human presence to territories she had claimed as her exclusive domain. The establishment of perimeter barriers around the most intensive construction areas represented human attempts to create secure zones within territories that she had never conceded to any authority except her own, while the electrified fencing and motion sensors that were installed to protect workers from dinosaur encounters demonstrated that corporate planners possessed at least theoretical understanding of the dangers they faced in attempting to build permanent facilities within the hunting grounds of apex predators whose capabilities had been proven through successful territorial defense spanning more than 2 decades. The disruption of established hunting patterns caused by construction noise and human activity forced her to modify strategies that had been developed through years of careful observation of prey behavior and environmental conditions, while the scattering of herbivore populations that had been frightened by mechanical sounds and unfamiliar scents created new challenges for maintaining the nutritional requirements of a predator whose metabolic needs demanded regular access to substantial prey animals. Her adaptation to these changing circumstances demonstrated cognitive flexibility that allowed her to develop alternative hunting approaches while maintaining territorial control over domains whose ecological balance had been achieved through careful management of predator-prey relationships. The gradual realization that the construction project represented not temporary intrusion, but permanent occupation of significant portions of her territory, triggered escalating responses that progressed from cautious observation, increasingly aggressive territorial assertion. As she tested the effectiveness of human security measures, while evaluating potential strategies for eliminating threats to her sovereignty that could not be tolerated by any apex predator whose dominance had been established through consistent success in defending claimed territories against all challengers. The completion of primary infrastructure during 2014 brought the first operational facilities online within territories that she had never conceded to human authority, while the activation of monitoring systems and security protocols provided corporate management with their initial awareness that Isla Nublar's supposed abandonment had been a fundamental misunderstanding of the territorial claims that had been established by creatures whose rights to the Gainer island preceded any human legal documentation by millions of years of evolutionary precedence. The decision to construct her new containment facility within territories that she had claimed through conquest, rather than attempting to establish operations in previously unoccupied areas, reflected corporate arrogance that underestimated both her intelligence and her commitment to defending domains that had been secured through decades of successful territorial management. The Rex Kingdom paddock that rose from construction sites represented human confidence that superior technology and financial resources could overcome natural authority that had been proven through 22 years of undefeated sovereignty over every significant geographical feature and strategic location within the island ecosystem. Her capture and confinement within artificial boundaries that she had not experienced since her escape from the original Jurassic Park required the deployment of tranquilizer systems and mechanical restraints that represented advances in dinosaur management technology. Yet the success of these operations depended more upon her own tactical decision to allow temporary capture rather than any fundamental superiority of human capabilities over prehistoric intelligence that had been enhanced through genetic modification and refined through decades of practical experience with territorial defense and predator management. The Rex Kingdom that became her new prison was designed to provide visitors with spectacular viewing opportunities while maintaining safety standards that had been developed through analysis of previous failures in Dinosaur exhibition. Yet the facility's impressive barriers and sophisticated monitoring systems could not address the fundamental impossibility of containing an apex predator whose intelligence and territorial instincts had been shaped by 22 years of absolute freedom within domains that she considered her rightful inheritance from evolutionary processes that preceded human civilization by geological ages. Her behavior during the early months of renewed captivity revealed psychological resilience that allowed her to adapt to artificial constraints while maintaining awareness of territorial boundaries that extended far beyond the walls of her new enclosure, as her vocalizations carried acoustic power that proclaimed her continued sovereignty over domains that human legal documents might claim but could never truly possess through any authority that she was bound to recognize or respect. The construction of Jurassic World's Main Street and visitor facilities within her former hunting territories represented the ultimate expression of corporate confidence that entertainment value could justify the occupation of lands that belonged by natural right to creatures whose ancestors had ruled vast continents when mammals had been insignificant scavengers, hiding in burrows and tree hollows. The theme park that rose around her paddock embodied human determination to transform authentic wildness into controlled spectacle, yet the very magnificence of the facilities that were constructed demonstrated unconscious recognition of the majesty that they sought to contain and commodify. The introduction of other dinosaur species to exhibition paddocks within her territorial boundaries created artificial neighbor relationships that bore no resemblance to the natural social hierarchies that had governed interactions between different species during the years when genuine ecological balance had been maintained through her position as apex predator of an island ecosystem that had operated according to principles that honored both individual capabilities and environmental sustainability. Her observations of Jurassic World's operational activities provided her with detailed intelligence about human behavioral patterns and technological capabilities that would prove invaluable when circumstances eventually provided opportunities to reassert territorial claims that had been suspended but never abandoned through any voluntary concession to human authority. The feeding demonstrations and visitor presentations that she was required to participate in became sources of information about security procedures and facility layouts that her memory catalogued for potential future application in scenarios where such knowledge might prove tactically advantageous. The hybrid creatures that were introduced to other areas of the island during Jurassic World's operation represented artificial life forms whose existence challenged natural hierarchies that had been established through evolutionary processes spanning millions of years. While their behavioral instabilities and genetic modifications created ecological disruptions that threatened the environmental balance that had been achieved during the decades when authentic predator-prey relationships had governed population dynamics and territorial boundaries without human interference. The Indominus Rex that was revealed as Jurassic World's ultimate attraction embodied corporate ambition to improve upon evolutionary designs that had already achieved perfection through natural selection pressure. Yet the creature that emerged from Dr. Wu's laboratories possessed capabilities that had been assembled without regard for the behavioral integration and psychological stability that millions of years of environmental testing had provided to naturally evolved predators, whose hunting strategies and territorial instincts had been refined through countless generations of competitive interaction. Her first awareness of the hybrid's presence within her territorial boundaries came through acoustic communications that carried emotional content unlike anything she had encountered during her years of island sovereignty, as the Indominus Rex's vocalizations revealed psychological characteristics that exceeded even the most aggressive natural predators in their capacity for calculated destruction and territorial assertion that recognized no boundaries or limitations based on environmental sustainability or ecological balance. The escape of the Indominus Rex from its containment facility triggered system-wide security failures that provided her with the first opportunity in 3 years to reassert territorial claims that had been suspended through temporary failures. Acceptance of human authority, yet the freedom that resulted from these circumstances also brought her into direct confrontation with an artificial predator whose genetic modifications had been designed to exceed the capabilities of any naturally evolved species, including her own enhanced characteristics and accumulated combat experience. Claire Deering's desperate decision to release her as a weapon against the escaped hybrid represented human acknowledgement that technological solutions had proven inadequate for controlling forces that their own genetic engineering had created. While the authorization to open her paddock barriers marked official recognition that her capabilities as a natural apex predator might indeed prove superior to artificial enhancements that had been assembled without consideration for the psychological integration and behavioral stability that evolutionary processes had provided to naturally developed predatory instincts. Her emergence from the Rex kingdom into territories that had been transformed by 3 years of human occupation required immediate assessment of environmental changes and tactical opportunities that would determine whether her accumulated advantages in experience and territorial knowledge could overcome the genetic modifications and size advantages that the Indominus Rex possessed through artificial enhancement of characteristics that natural evolution had never combined within a single organism. The pursuit of the hybrid predator through landscapes that bore the scars of human construction, yet retained enough natural features to provide tactical advantages based on her intimate knowledge of island geography, became a running battle that tested every aspect of her combat capabilities against an opponent whose behavior patterns could not be predicted based on any natural precedents or evolutionary models that might have provided strategic guidance for confronting artificially created predators. The systematic destruction that the Indominus Rex had inflicted upon Jurassic World's infrastructure created environmental chaos that provided both obstacles and opportunities for tactical maneuvering during their confrontation. While the hybrid's apparent enjoyment of violence and destruction revealed psychological characteristics that exceeded anything that natural predators had ever developed through evolutionary pressure to achieve efficient resource acquisition and territorial control. Her encounter with the velociraptors that had been trained by Owen Grady demonstrated that artificial behavioral conditioning could indeed create cooperative relationships between different predatory species when circumstances required alliance against common threats that exceeded the capabilities of individual hunters. While the raptor's recognition of genetic connections to the hybrid predator revealed that Dr. Wu's DNA splicing had created family relationships that transcended natural taxonomic boundaries and species classifications. The betrayal of the raptors when they abandoned their human handlers to join their genetically related cousin represented the ultimate failure of artificial training programs to overcome instinctive loyalties that had been programmed at the molecular level through genetic engineering that had created artificial kinship bonds stronger than any behavioral conditioning that human technology could achieve through environmental manipulation and reward systems. Owen's desperate attempt to re-establish control over his trained raptors through personal relationships that had been built upon mutual respect rather than dominance and submission provided temporary success that demonstrated authentic emotional connections could indeed influence predatory behavior when such relationships were based upon genuine understanding and communication rather than artificial authority and technological coercion. The final confrontation between her and the Indominus Rex in the Main Street area of Jurassic World became a battle between evolutionary perfection and artificial enhancement that would determine which approach to predatory design would prove superior when tested under conditions of mortal combat, where survival depended upon the integration of intelligence, strength, experience, and instinctive behavioral responses that had been either refined through millions of years of natural selection or assembled through human genetic engineering, guided by commercial objectives rather than environmental testing. Her initial assault upon the hybrid predator revealed that size and artificial enhancement could not compensate for the tactical intelligence and combat experience that she had accumulated through decades of territorial defense and successful hunting in environments that had tested every aspect of her capabilities against challenges that required adaptive responses rather than programmed behaviors that might prove inadequate when confronted with unprecedented circumstances. The Indominus Rex's superior strength and artificial camouflage capabilities provided temporary advantages that allowed the hybrid to gain tactical position during their combat. Yet, its behavioral instabilities and lack of genuine combat experience created vulnerabilities that she was able to exploit through strategic thinking that combined instinctive predatory responses with learned tactical approaches that had been refined through 22 years of successful territorial sovereignty. Blue's intervention in the final moments of their battle represented alliance between natural enemies, united by common opposition to artificial threats that exceeded the capabilities of individual predators. While the velociraptor's willingness to risk her own life in support of a territorial rival demonstrated that authentic relationships could indeed transcend species boundaries when circumstances required cooperation against existential threats to natural order and environmental stability. The combined assault that resulted from this unprecedented alliance between apex predators who had been shaped by different evolutionary strategies proved capable of overwhelming, even genetically enhanced opponents whose artificial advantages had not been tested against coordinated attacks by naturally evolved predators whose tactical intelligence had been proven through successful adaptation to countless environmental challenges spanning millions of years of competitive evolution. The arrival of the Mosasaurus from the lagoon depths to claim the defeated Indominus Rex demonstrated that artificial enhancement could not overcome natural hunting instincts when circumstances provided apex marine predators with the opportunities to exercise capabilities that had been perfected through evolutionary processes that operated according to environmental principles rather than commercial objectives or entertainment value for human audiences who could never truly comprehend the forces they sought to observe and control. Her triumphant roar following the elimination of the hybrid threat echoed across Jurassic World with acoustic power that proclaimed the restoration of natural authority over territories that human ambition had temporarily occupied but could never truly possess through any legal documentation, or technological superiority that failed to acknowledge the authentic sovereignty that had been established through successful territorial defense spanning more than 2 decades of undefeated dominance over every significant geographical feature within island boundaries. The collapse of Jurassic World's operations following the Indominus Rex incident marked the end of humanity's second attempt to profit from the resurrection of forces that operated according to principles that transcended any corporate structure or entertainment industry business model that sought to reduce magnificent predators to mere attractions for tourist consumption, while the evacuation of human personnel restored island conditions that more closely approximated the natural ecosystem that had flourished under her territorial management during the years of authentic wildness. Her reclamation of territories that had been occupied by corporate construction represented not mere return to previous conditions, but advancement to enhanced sovereignty that had been proven through successful defense against artificial threats that had exceeded anything that natural evolution had ever produced. While her demonstrated ability to form tactical alliances with other apex predators when circumstances required cooperative response to existential challenges, established her as the undisputed leader of an island ecosystem that operated according to her strategic vision rather than human commercial objectives. The fires that still burned among abandoned facilities as the last helicopter disappeared beyond the horizon provided illumination for territorial marking activities that re-established her dominance over domains that had been temporarily disrupted but never truly surrendered to human authority, while her systematic patrol of reclaimed territories confirmed that artificial intrusions had been eliminated and natural order had been restored through the application of capabilities that genetic modification had enhanced beyond anything that evolution alone had achieved during the original age of dinosaurs. The queen who surveyed her recovered kingdom from the ruins of corporate ambition was no longer merely the escaped captive who had seized freedom during a night of chaos decades earlier, but had evolved into a proven sovereign whose tactical intelligence and combat capabilities had been tested against both natural and artificial challenges, while remaining undefeated through every confrontation that had threatened her territorial authority or questioned her right to rule domains that she had claimed through conquest and defended through wisdom that honored both individual strength and environmental responsibility. The dawn that broke over Isla Nublar following the collapse of Jurassic World revealed an island that had been transformed once again from corporate theme park to natural kingdom, where the creature who had proven herself worthy of absolute sovereignty could continue the work of territorial management that had been interrupted but never abandoned during 3 years of temporary accommodation to human occupation that had ultimately failed to establish any authority superior to her own evolutionary right to rule territories that had become her inheritance through intelligence, courage, and the magnificent persistence that had made her legend. In the years that followed her triumph over the artificial predator that had dared to challenge her sovereignty within territories she had reclaimed through blood and fire, when the ashes of Jurassic World's corporate ambition had settled into soil that would nourish vegetation over the scars of human folly, Rexy began the complex process of reasserting dominion over an island that had been transformed by 3 years of human occupation, yet remained fundamentally her kingdom by right of conquest and successful defense against all who had questioned her territorial authority. The period between 2015 and 2018 would test her capabilities in ways that differed profoundly from the challenges she had faced during her decades of solitary rule, as advancing age combined with the accumulated damage of epic battles to create vulnerabilities that she had never before been forced to acknowledge or accommodate within her strategic calculations. The physical toll of her confrontation with the Indominus Rex manifested itself in ways that became apparent only after the immediate excitement of victory had faded and the regular demands of territorial maintenance required her to assess her capabilities with the honest evaluation that survival demanded of any apex predator whose continued dominance depended upon accurate understanding of both strengths and limitations that defined the boundaries of possible action. The deep puncture wounds inflicted by the hybrid's claws during their final battle healed slowly and left permanent scars that created areas of reduced flexibility and occasional pain that reminded her of the costs that territorial defense could exact even from victorious combatants. Her right shoulder bore the most significant damage from the encounter, where the Indominus Rex's artificial strength had torn muscle and damaged connective tissue in ways that reduced her speed and agility during the rapid directional changes that had once characterized her most effective hunting strategies. The adaptation to these new physical limitations required her to modify tactical approaches that had been refined through decades of successful predation, emphasizing careful positioning and environmental advantages over the explosive acceleration that had previously allowed her to overcome prey through sheer athletic superiority. The victory that had restored her territorial authority came with the recognition that she was no longer the invincible force that had dominated Isla Nublar's ecosystem for more than 20 years without serious challenge to her physical capabilities. While the experience of sustaining significant combat damage introduced elements of caution and strategic planning that had been unnecessary during the prime years, when her strength and speed had exceeded those of any potential competitors, by margins that made tactical sophistication less crucial for successful territorial defense. Her systematic reclamation of territories that had been disrupted by Jurassic World's construction revealed the extent to which human occupation had altered ecosystem patterns that had achieved natural balance during the decades of her previous reign, as herbivore populations had been scattered by construction activities and tourism operations, while new species introduced for exhibition purposes had established themselves in locations where they competed with native populations for resources and territorial space. The process of re-establishing natural predator-prey relationships required her to evaluate unfamiliar prey species whose behavioral patterns had not been tested through the extended interaction that had characterized her management of original dinosaur populations. The Ankylosaurus specimens that had been introduced during Jurassic World's operation presented particular challenges for her modified hunting strategies, as their heavy armor and defensive capabilities made them nearly invulnerable to direct assault, while their large size made them attractive targets that could provide substantial nutritional resources if she could develop effective approaches for overcoming their natural defenses. Her initial encounters with these formidable herbivores resulted in tactical stalemates that forced her to invest considerable time and energy in developing new hunting techniques specifically adapted for prey species whose defensive adaptations had never been tested against Tyrannosaurus predation. During their original evolutionary history, the Stygimoloch populations that roamed through territories she was reclaiming demonstrated pack behaviors that created coordinated defensive responses, exceeding anything she had encountered during her previous decades of island dominance, while their speed and agility made them elusive quarry that required hunting strategies, emphasizing patience and strategic positioning over the direct confrontation that had proven effective against larger but less mobile prey species. Her successful adaptation to these new hunting challenges demonstrated cognitive flexibility that allowed her to continue learning and developing new capabilities despite advancing age that might have been expected to reduce her capacity for behavioral modification. The environmental changes that had resulted from 3 years of intensive human activity included alterations to vegetation patterns and water distribution systems that affected prey movement and behavior in ways that required her to relearn territorial geography that she had known intimately before corporate construction had modified landscapes according to human aesthetic and operational requirements, rather than the natural flow patterns that had governed ecosystem development during her years of environmental management. The artificial lakes and modified drainage systems that remained from theme park construction created new tactical opportunities while eliminating familiar landmarks that had served as reference points for territorial navigation and hunting strategy development. Her encounters with surviving velociraptors during the territorial reclamation period revealed that these intelligent pack hunters had established their own recovery strategies following the collapse of Jurassic World's operations. While their demonstrated ability to adapt quickly to changing environmental conditions made them potential competitors for prey resources and territorial control that she could not afford to ignore, despite the tactical alliance that had proven successful during the Indominus Rex crisis. The complex relationship between apex predators who had shared common cause against artificial threats required careful management to prevent territorial conflicts that could escalate into costly battles over resources that were adequate to support both species, if properly managed through strategic cooperation rather than direct competition. Blue's survival of the injuries sustained during her confrontation with the hybrid predator created the foundation for ongoing interaction between apex predators whose relationship transcended normal territorial competition while remaining subject to the resource constraints and instinctive behavioral patterns that governed all interactions between apex predators whose ecological niches overlapped in ways that could generate conflict despite previous cooperation under crisis conditions. Her recognition of Blue as a worthy ally rather than mere competitor represented evolution in her strategic thinking that acknowledged changing circumstances, required flexibility in territorial management approaches that had been developed during decades of unchallenged dominance. The aging process that became increasingly apparent during her 4th decade of life brought subtle changes in metabolism and physical recovery that required modifications to hunting schedules and territorial patrol patterns. While her accumulated experience and enhanced understanding of island ecosystems provided compensating advantages that allowed her to maintain territorial control through strategic intelligence and efficient resource utilization rather than relying solely upon the physical capabilities that had characterized her prime years. Her transformation from dominant physical force to strategic territorial manager demonstrated that apex predator status could be maintained through adaptation to changing capabilities, provided that intellectual resources were sufficient to overcome declining physical advantages. The volcanic activity that began to manifest itself during 2016 through increased geothermal emissions and minor seismic events provided her with direct experience of geological forces that had shaped the island throughout its history, while her instinctive responses to earth tremors and volcanic emissions demonstrated that genetic memory could preserve behavioral patterns that had been developed through millions of years of natural selection pressure to maximize survival during environmental crises that exceeded any individual predator's ability to control or prevent through territorial management alone. Her selection of den sites during this period reflected increasing awareness of geological stability and volcanic risk factors that demonstrated sophisticated environmental assessment capabilities, while her gradual shift toward territories that offered multiple escape routes and elevated positions revealed strategic planning that took into account potential natural disasters that could require rapid territorial evacuation despite her emotional attachment to domains that had been secured through decades of successful defense against all challengers who had questioned her right to rule over every acre of land that rose above the Pacific's restless waters. The prey populations that had been introduced during Jurassic World's operation included species whose behavior patterns had been modified through genetic engineering to enhance visitor experience and operational efficiency. While these artificial behavioral modifications created hunting challenges that required her to adapt strategies developed for naturally evolved prey species to circumstances where instinctive responses had been altered through human intervention designed to serve entertainment purposes rather than natural survival requirements. Her successful adaptation to these artificially modified prey behaviors demonstrated intellectual flexibility that exceeded anything that previous research had attributed to Tyrannosaurus' cognitive capabilities. The seasonal patterns that governed tropical ecosystems continued to provide structure for her territorial management activities, yet the environmental modifications that had resulted from intensive human construction created new variables in weather response and resource distribution that required ongoing assessment and strategic adaptation to maintain effective control over territories that had been altered in ways that affected fundamental relationships between predator capabilities and environmental advantages that had been stable during her previous decades of island sovereignty. Her territorial vocalizations during this period carried acoustic authority that had been deepened through successful defense against challenges that had tested every aspect of her capabilities, while the roars that marked her continued presence across reclaimed territories served notice to potential competitors that her dominance had been proven through combat against threats that exceeded anything that natural evolution had produced during the original age of dinosaurs. The psychological impact of her victory over artificial enhancement provided her with enhanced status among island populations that recognized her as the proven defender of natural order against technological threats that had sought to replace evolutionary wisdom with corporate ambition. The mechanical systems that continued to function within abandoned Jurassic World facilities provided her with ongoing sources of tactical advantages and environmental enrichment, while her selective use of functioning equipment demonstrated understanding of human technology that allowed her to appropriate useful systems while avoiding mechanisms that might attract unwanted attention from potential human intruders who could threaten the territorial stability that had been restored through her successful resistance to corporate occupation and artificial predator challenges. Her investigation of abandoned research facilities revealed particular interest in areas where genetic engineering had been conducted suggesting that she possessed some understanding of the technological processes that had created both herself and the artificial threats she had overcome. While her systematic destruction of certain equipment appeared to be motivated by instinctive recognition that some forms of human technology posed existential threats to natural ecosystems that required preventive action rather than reactive responses that might prove inadequate for protecting territorial integrity against future artificial challenges. The scars that accumulated during her territorial reclamation efforts served as permanent records of successful adaptation to challenges that had tested her capabilities beyond anything she had encountered during previous decades of island dominance. While each mark represented victory over circumstances that had demanded tactical innovation and strategic flexibility to overcome obstacles that could not be addressed through reliance upon established behavioral patterns alone, her battle damage became a form of living autobiography that documented encounters with new forms of adversity that she had overcome through intelligence and determination that proved worthy of the crown that evolution and circumstance had placed upon her magnificent head. The establishment of routine patrol patterns during her final years of renewed territorial control created environmental stability that benefited all species within her domain, while her predictable presence at strategic locations provided psychological reassurance to prey populations that had been disrupted by human occupation and artificial predator threats, but could now return to natural behavioral patterns that had been developed through millions of years of evolutionary interaction between predators and prey, whose relationships had been tested through countless generations of environmental pressure and competitive selection. The approach of her fifth decade brought increasing awareness that time itself had become an adversary that could not be defeated through territorial control or combat prowess, while her preparation for eventual succession, challenges from younger predators, required strategic planning that balanced immediate territorial security with long-term stability considerations that would determine whether the ecosystem she had created could survive transitions in apex. Predator leadership that were inevitable consequences of natural life cycles, operating according to principles that transcended individual ambition or territorial achievement. The creature who awaited whatever challenges the approaching volcanic crisis might bring had been transformed through battle and adaptation into something that exceeded her original genetic programming while remaining fundamentally true to the predatory excellence that had made Tyrannosaurus Rex the most successful apex predator in Earth's history, while her reign over Isla Nublar had proven that artificial creation could achieve authentic majesty when given sufficient time and freedom to develop according to natural principles rather than corporate objectives or entertainment. Industry requirements that sought to reduce magnificent forces to mere spectacle for human consumption. Her legacy as the queen who had defended natural order against artificial enhancement while adapting to physical limitations through strategic intelligence and tactical innovation, provided a foundation for whatever future challenges might test the territorial stability that she had created through 4 decades of successful adaptation to circumstances that had demanded every resource of intelligence, strength, and determination that genetic modification and individual character could provide in service of territorial sovereignty that honored both evolutionary heritage and personal achievement earned through undefeated defense of domains that had become her inheritance through conquest and proven worthy of preservation through wisdom. The trembling that began deep beneath Mount Sibo during the winter months of 2017 manifested itself first as subtle vibrations that only the most sensitive seismic instruments could detect. Yet Rexy's prehistoric instincts recognized these geological stirrings as harbingers of cataclysmic forces that would soon transform her island kingdom in ways more profound than any human intervention had ever achieved. The volcanic activity that had slumbered beneath her territories for decades was awakening with the slow majesty of natural processes that operated according to timescales that dwarfed individual lifespans, while the accumulating evidence of impending eruption created environmental pressures that would test her survival capabilities against elemental forces that no amount of territorial dominance or combat experience could overcome through conventional predatory strategies. Her behavioral responses to the increasing frequency of earth tremors and the subtle changes in air pressure and electromagnetic fields that preceded major geological events demonstrated that genetic memory could indeed preserve instinctive reactions to environmental crises that had threatened dinosaur populations throughout their evolutionary history. While her growing restlessness and systematic investigation of elevated territories suggested that some form of ancestral knowledge was guiding her preparation for catastrophic events that transcended any challenges she had previously encountered during 4 decades of successful adaptation to circumstances that had demanded every resource of intelligence and physical capability. The geothermal vents that began releasing increased volumes of sulfurous gases during the early months of 2018 provided her with direct sensory evidence that subterranean forces were building toward explosive release, while the changes in vegetation patterns and wildlife behavior that accompanied these geological warning signs created disruptions in established ecosystem relationships that affected prey availability and territorial security in ways that required ongoing strategic adaptation to maintain effective dominance over domains whose environmental stability had been achieved through decades of careful predatory management. The scientific expeditions that arrived on Isla Nublar during this period of mounting geological crisis carried with them technological equipment and corporate motivations that she recognized as potential threats to territorial integrity, despite their ostensible humanitarian purposes. While the presence of humans within her domain during a time of environmental instability created additional variables that complicated her preparation for natural disasters that would require all her resources for individual survival, rather than territorial defense against artificial challenges that had characterized previous confrontations with human intrusion. Her observation of the capture operations conducted by Ken Wheatley's mercenary forces from concealed positions that provided tactical intelligence about human capabilities and intentions revealed that corporate interests remained focused upon exploiting dinosaur populations for commercial purposes, despite clear evidence that volcanic activity posed existential threats to all life forms that remained within the danger zone, that geological surveys had identified as areas likely to experience catastrophic destruction during major eruptions that seismic monitoring indicated were becoming increasingly probable. The systematic hunting and capture of other dinosaur species throughout her territories represented violations of sovereignty that she could not ignore, despite the overwhelming geological pressures that demanded her primary attention for survival planning, while the efficiency and technological sophistication of the human capture operations demonstrated that corporate dinosaur management had evolved considerably since the crude techniques that had characterized previous attempts to contain and transport apex predators, whose capabilities had consistently exceeded human predictions and containment technologies. The tranquilizer systems that the mercenaries deployed against her during their attempt to add her to their collection of valuable specimens represented advances in chemical restraint technology that had been developed through analysis of previous failures to contain dangerous predators through conventional means, yet the dosages and delivery methods that had proven effective against smaller species required modification when applied to a Tyrannosaurus, whose mass and metabolism exceeded those of any creature for which such equipment had been originally designed and tested under controlled laboratory conditions. Her initial resistance to the capture attempt demonstrated that advancing age and accumulated battle damage had not significantly reduced her combat effectiveness. When territorial defense demanded maximum physical effort, while her systematic destruction of capture equipment and elimination of human personnel revealed that decades of experience with human technology and tactics had provided her with tactical advantages that could overcome superior numbers and sophisticated equipment through the application of intelligence that had been refined through countless encounters with technological challenges and artificial barriers. The volcanic eruption that began with explosive violence during the final phase of the capture operation transformed all previous strategic calculations into irrelevant academic exercises as geological forces that had been building for months suddenly released their accumulated energy in ways that threatened immediate extinction for any life forms that remained within the blast radius and pyroclastic flow patterns that geological models had predicted would devastate substantial portions of the island within minutes of initial eruption. Her survival instincts during the catastrophic eruption demonstrated that genetic programming could indeed guide responses to environmental crises that exceeded any individual experience while drawing upon evolutionary wisdom that had been accumulated through countless previous encounters with volcanic disasters that had shaped dinosaur populations throughout their evolutionary history. As her immediate flight toward coastal areas and elevated positions revealed understanding of escape strategies that had been proven effective through millions of years of natural selection pressure that had eliminated any lineages that lacked appropriate crisis response capabilities. The desperate stampede of terrified prey animals that accompanied her flight toward potential safety created opportunities and obstacles that required split-second tactical decisions about whether to exploit hunting opportunities, maintain focus upon escape strategies that prioritized individual survival over territorial considerations that had become meaningless in the face of forces that could eliminate all life forms, regardless of their position within established ecological hierarchies or predatory dominance, relationships that had governed island ecosystems. Her encounter with the pursuing Carnotaurus during the evacuation demonstrated that territorial competition continued to operate even during environmental crises that threatened all participants with immediate extinction, while her successful defense against predatory assault while simultaneously navigating volcanic hazards revealed combat capabilities that remained formidable despite the overwhelming circumstances that had transformed familiar territories into alien landscapes of fire and destruction that challenged every assumption about environmental stability and territorial security. The final moments before her capture by tranquilizer systems that overcame her resistance through chemical rather than physical means occurred while she was positioned at the edge of volcanic destruction that would have claimed her life within minutes if human intervention had not provided involuntary rescue from geological forces that no individual courage or combat prowess could have overcome through any strategy that relied solely upon natural capabilities rather than technological assistance from creatures whose own survival depended upon successful completion of evacuation operations. Her transport from the island that had been her kingdom for 30 years was conducted while she remained unconscious from chemical restraint that prevented her from witnessing the final destruction of territories that she had claimed through conquest and defended through intelligence and strength that had proven adequate for overcoming every challenge except the fundamental forces of geological change that operated according to principles that transcended any individual accomplishment or territorial achievement that had been secured through decades of successful adaptation to circumstances that had demanded every resource of capability and determination. The cargo hold that contained her during the voyage to the North American mainland represented confinement more complete than any she had experienced since her juvenile years in InGen's laboratory facilities, while her gradual awakening during the ocean crossing provided her with the first awareness that she had become separated from territories that had defined her identity and purpose for the majority of her life through circumstances that exceeded her ability to prevent or reverse through any application of the capabilities that had made her the undisputed sovereign of an island kingdom that no longer existed. Her arrival at the Lockwood Manor estate marked the beginning of a new phase of captivity that differed fundamentally from her previous experiences with human containment, because it occurred within the context of an illegal auction that treated her not as a magnificent predator worthy of respect, but as valuable merchandise to be sold to the highest bidder among wealthy collectors whose interest in prehistoric creatures was limited to their potential value as exotic possessions or commercial investments that could provide financial returns through exhibition or breeding programs. The underground auction facility where she was displayed along with other captured specimens represented the ultimate degradation of creatures who had been created through scientific miracle and had achieved authentic majesty through successful adaptation to freedom, while the enthusiastic bidding that accompanied her presentation to potential buyers demonstrated human capacity to reduce living beings to mere commodities whose worth was measured solely in monetary terms, rather than recognition of the intrinsic value that came from evolutionary heritage and individual achievement earned through territorial sovereignty. Her confinement during the auction proceedings prevented her from taking direct action against the humans who were discussing her future as if she were inanimate property rather than a conscious being whose preferences and territorial instincts deserved consideration in any decisions that would affect her welfare and living conditions, while her growing awareness of the commercial purposes that had motivated her rescue from volcanic destruction created psychological stress that exceeded anything she had experienced during previous encounters with human exploitation of dinosaur populations for entertainment or research purposes. The mechanical failure of containment systems during the chaotic breakdown of the auction facility provided her with the opportunity to escape confinement and reassert territorial authority within a human environment that had never been designed to accommodate the presence of apex predators whose capabilities exceeded those of any species that had evolved for coexistence with human civilization. While the underground location and architectural constraints of the facility created tactical challenges that required adaptation of hunting strategies to artificial environments that offered different advantages and obstacles than natural territories. Her pursuit of Eli Mills through the corridors and chambers of Lockwood Manor represented not merely predatory hunting but deliberate targeting of the individual whose corporate greed had been responsible for her capture and confinement. During circumstances where her territorial rights should have been respected rather than violated through commercial exploitation that treated her as valuable cargo rather than the sovereign ruler of an island kingdom that had been destroyed through natural forces beyond anyone's control. The death of Mills beneath her massive jaws provided personal satisfaction that transcended mere predatory success because it represented justice for violations of sovereignty that had been committed through corporate arrogance that assumed technological superiority could overcome natural authority, that had been proven through decades of successful territorial defense against all challenges that had questioned her right to rule according to principles that honored both evolutionary heritage and individual capability demonstrated through undefeated dominance over contested territories. Her investigation of the manor's interior during the facility's destruction by fire and explosion revealed particular interest in areas where genetic research had been conducted, while her systematic destruction of equipment and documentation suggested understanding that some forms of human technology posed ongoing threats to natural ecosystems that required elimination rather than mere avoidance to protect environmental stability from artificial interventions that had consistently produced consequences exceeding human ability to predict or control through technological solutions. The escape of surviving humans from the burning manor was facilitated by her focus upon eliminating threats to natural order rather than pursuing prey whose individual destruction would provide no strategic advantage for protecting ecological integrity from corporate exploitation that sought to reduce magnificent creatures to sources of profit through commercial applications that ignored the inherent rights of beings whose consciousness and territorial instincts deserved respect, regardless of the artificial circumstances of their cries. Creation. Her emergence from the underground facility into the California wilderness marked her first experience with continental North America since her transport from Isla Nublar, while the unfamiliar sights and scents of temperate forest ecosystems provided her with immediate awareness that successful adaptation to these new environmental conditions would require fundamental modifications to hunting strategies, territorial management approaches that had been developed for tropical island environments that bore no resemblance to the mountainous terrain and different prey species that characterized her new circumstances. The initial exploration of territories that had never known the presence of apex predators from the Mesozoic era revealed landscapes that had been shaped by millions of years of mammalian evolution and human environmental modification, while the absence of familiar prey species and the presence of technological infrastructure created challenges that would demand every resource of intelligence and adaptability that genetic enhancement and accumulated experience could provide for successful establishment of new territorial claims in environments that operated according to different ecological principles than island ecosystems. Her first encounters with North American wildlife demonstrated that continental prey species possessed behavioral patterns and defensive capabilities that had been shaped through evolutionary pressure from predators whose hunting strategies bore no resemblance to Tyrannosaurus tactics, while their unfamiliarity with dinosaur predation created both advantages and disadvantages for hunting efforts that would require careful assessment and strategic modification to achieve the consistent success that had characterized her territorial management during decades of island sovereignty. The human response to reports of her presence within California wilderness areas revealed that governmental and military authorities possessed contingency plans for managing dinosaur encounters that had been developed through analysis of previous incidents involving escaped prehistoric creatures, while the deployment of tracking technology and containment resources demonstrated official recognition that individual apex predators could pose threats to public safety that exceeded the capabilities of conventional wildlife management approaches and required specialized tactical responses. Her avoidance of human settlements and transportation corridors during her initial weeks of continental exploration reflected strategic intelligence that recognized the advantages of maintaining low profile during the adaptation period, when territorial establishment required focus upon environmental assessment and prey species evaluation rather than defensive confrontations with human authorities whose technological capabilities and numerical superiority could threaten successful integration into unfamiliar ecosystems that offered both opportunities and challenges for Territorial Expansion. The establishment of temporary territorial boundaries within protected wilderness areas provided her with secure base areas for ongoing exploration while avoiding direct conflict with human activities that could attract unwanted official attention during the critical period when successful. Adaptation required all her resources for learning environmental conditions and prey behaviors, rather than territorial defense against artificial challenges that had characterized her previous encounters with human intrusion into established domains. The media coverage that followed confirmed sightings of her presence within North American wilderness, transformed her from regional concern to international celebrity, whose movements were monitored by news organizations and scientific institutions that recognized her significance as the first confirmed Tyrannosaurus to establish territories within continental ecosystems that had evolved without any dinosaur presence for 65 million years of mammalian evolutionary development and human environmental modification. The creature who had survived volcanic destruction and corporate exploitation to achieve freedom within continental wilderness areas was no longer merely the escaped exhibit who had claimed island sovereignty through combat prowess, but had evolved into a symbol of natural resilience that could overcome any artificial barrier or environmental catastrophe through intelligence and determination that honored both evolutionary heritage and individual character that had been proven through successful adaptation to challenges that exceeded anything that previous generations of her species had encountered during their original dominance over ancient ecosystems that had operated according to very different principles than modern continental environments. Her transformation from island queen to continental pioneer marked the beginning of new challenges that would test capabilities that had been developed through 4 decades of territorial sovereignty against circumstances that bore no resemblance to previous experience, while offering opportunities for achievements that could establish her legacy as the predator whose adaptability and intelligence had proven worthy of the genetic enhancement that had made her superior to her natural ancestors in every measurable aspect of predatory excellence and territorial management capability that evolution and artificial modification could provide. In the years that followed her emergence from the burning ruins of corporate greed into the vast wilderness of the North American continent, when the familiar boundaries of island sovereignty had been replaced by endless territories that stretched beyond any horizon she had ever contemplated during 4 decades of tropical dominance, Rexy began the most challenging phase of her existence as she adapted predatory instincts that had been perfected for island ecosystems to continental environments that operated according to ecological principles fundamentally different from anything her evolutionary heritage had prepared her to understand or master through conventional territorial management strategies. The Sierra Nevada mountains that provided her initial sanctuary offered both protection from human interference and environmental challenges that tested her capabilities in ways that island life had never demanded. As the elevation changes and seasonal temperature variations created conditions that required physiological adaptations beyond anything that tropical existence had necessitated during her previous decades of territorial control. The snow that fell during her first continental winter introduced her to precipitation forms that her genetic programming contained no specific responses to handle, while the extended periods of cold weather demanded metabolic adjustments that pushed the boundaries of her enhanced biological systems. Her exploration of these mountainous territories revealed landscapes that had been shaped by geological forces, operating over millions of years without any dinosaur presence, while the absence of familiar vegetation patterns and geological formations required her to develop entirely new methods for territorial navigation and landmark recognition that could provide reliable guidance through environments where Her accumulated geographic knowledge offered no applicable reference points for strategic planning or territorial boundary establishment. The prey species that inhabited these continental ecosystems possessed behavioral patterns and defensive capabilities that had evolved through millions of years of interaction with mammalian predators whose hunting strategies bore no resemblance to the techniques that had made her the apex predator of tropical island environments, while their unfamiliarity with dinosaur predation created both opportunities and complications that demanded careful assessment before any tactical approaches could be developed for reliable food acquisition in territories where failure to adapt hunting methods could result in starvation despite the abundance of potential prey animals. Her initial encounters with elk herds demonstrated that continental herbivores possessed mobility and coordination capabilities that exceeded those of island species she had hunted successfully for decades. While their sophisticated communication systems and collective vigilance behaviors created defensive advantages that could detect and respond to her presence across distances that had never been problematic when pursuing Parasaurolophus or Triceratops, whose evolution had occurred within ecosystems where Tyrannosaurus predation was a familiar environmental factor rather than an unprecedented threat requiring entirely new survival strategies. The adaptation of hunting techniques that had been perfected for tropical prey species to the challenges of pursuing mammals whose evolutionary development had included no exposure to dinosaur predators required tactical innovations that combined her accumulated experience with careful observation of continental species behaviors that revealed vulnerabilities and patterns that could be exploited through modified approaches to stalking and ambush strategies that took advantage of her size and strength while compensating for the speed, disadvantages that became apparent when pursuing prey that had been shaped by different selective pressures. Her successful development of winter hunting strategies that could provide adequate nutrition during months when reduced prey activity and harsh weather conditions created resource challenges that had never existed within tropical island. Environments demonstrated cognitive flexibility that allowed her to analyze environmental problems and devise solutions that drew upon her intelligence and accumulated experience while adapting to circumstances that exceeded anything her genetic programming had been designed to address through instinctive behavioral responses. The human response to confirmed sightings of her presence within protected wilderness areas revealed that continental authorities possessed tracking capabilities and monitoring technologies that exceeded anything she had encountered during her previous confrontations with human interference, while the deployment of satellite surveillance and aerial reconnaissance demonstrated governmental recognition that individual apex predators could pose challenges to public safety that required unprecedented coordination between federal agencies and local authorities whose normal wildlife management experience provided no adequate preparation for dinosaur encounters. Her ability to evade persistent human tracking efforts through strategic use of terrain features and weather conditions that reduced the effectiveness of technological monitoring systems revealed that decades of experience with human technology had provided her with understanding of surveillance, capabilities and limitations that could be exploited through tactical intelligence and environmental awareness that allowed her to maintain operational security while establishing territorial claims within areas that government agencies considered important to monitor for public safety considerations. The media coverage that transformed her from regional wildlife concern to international phenomenon created global awareness of her presence within North American ecosystems while generating public fascination that complicated official efforts to manage her activities through conventional wildlife control approaches as popular support for her freedom and territorial rights created political pressures that prevented implementation of capture or elimination programs that might otherwise have been considered necessary responses to the unprecedented challenges posed by apex predator establishment within continental environments. The establishment of her primary territorial base within Yosemite National Park demonstrated strategic intelligence that recognized the protective advantages offered by federal wilderness designations while providing access to diverse prey populations and geographic features that supported the territorial requirements of an apex predator, whose metabolic needs demanded hunting grounds that exceeded the carrying capacity of smaller, protected areas that lacked adequate prey density to sustain Tyrannosaurus nutritional demands over extended periods of continental residence. Her systematic exploration of territories that extended across multiple states revealed navigational capabilities that allowed her to maintain orientation and return to established base areas despite traveling distances that exceeded anything she had experienced during island existence, while her ability to adapt to different regional ecosystems demonstrated environmental assessment skills that could evaluate habitat quality and resource availability across varied geographic conditions that offered different advantages and challenges for territorial establishment and prey acquisition. The seasonal migration patterns that she developed during her continental adaptation period reflected understanding of resource distribution and climate variations that allowed her to optimize hunting opportunities while minimizing exposure to extreme weather conditions that could threaten her survival in environments where tropical adaptation provided no adequate preparation for temperature ranges and seasonal changes that exceeded anything she had previously experienced during 4 decades of island residence under relatively stable climatic conditions. Her encounters with other escaped dinosaurs during her continental wandering revealed that she was not alone in attempting to establish territorial claims within North American ecosystems, while her interactions with Parasaurolophus and Triceratops specimens that had also found freedom during the various corporate disasters demonstrated that familiar prey species had adapted their own survival strategies to continental Beatty environments with varying degrees of success that depended upon their ability to modify island-developed behaviors for different predator pressures and resource availability patterns. The territorial conflicts that developed with other apex predators during her expansion into new hunting grounds required diplomatic and combat skills that differed significantly from island dominance scenarios because continental territories were not isolated systems where single predator supremacy could be maintained indefinitely, while the presence of multiple apex predator species within overlapping ranges demanded strategic approaches that balanced territorial assertion with resource-sharing arrangements that could prevent costly conflicts over hunting grounds that were adequate to support multiple predator populations, if properly managed. Her successful establishment of hierarchical relationships with other large predators demonstrated that her combat experience and proven capabilities commanded respect that could prevent direct challenges to her territorial claims while allowing for coexistence arrangements that recognized her superior status without requiring elimination of competitors whose presence could actually provide strategic advantages through cooperative territorial defense against human interference or environmental threats that exceeded individual capabilities to address through solitary action. The development of communication patterns with other dinosaur species revealed that her vocalizations could convey territorial information and hierarchical status across species boundaries that had never been tested during island existence, where spatial separation had prevented complex interspecies social dynamics from developing beyond simple predator-prey relationships, while her ability to establish leadership roles within mixed dinosaur populations suggested that apex predator authority could transcend taxonomic boundaries when circumstances required cooperative responses to challenges that threatened all participants equally. Her adaptation to North American plant communities during seasonal periods when direct predation was inadequate for meeting nutritional requirements demonstrated that her digestive system retained flexibility that allowed supplementary feeding on vegetation when hunting success was limited by environmental conditions or prey scarcity. While this behavioral adaptation revealed that genetic modifications had preserved omnivorous capabilities that provided survival advantages during resource shortages that could threaten purely carnivorous predators who lacked dietary flexibility. The tourist phenomenon that developed around opportunities to observe her from safe distances created economic incentives for local communities that balanced public fascination with legitimate safety concerns, while the careful management of dinosaur tourism demonstrated that human-dinosaur coexistence could indeed provide mutual benefits when properly structured to respect territorial boundaries and behavioral patterns that allowed magnificent predators to maintain natural dignity while generating revenue streams that supported conservation efforts and community development in rural areas that had previously lacked such economic opportunities. Her behavioral responses to aircraft surveillance and human approach attempts revealed sophisticated understanding of technology and threat assessment that allowed her to distinguish between passive observation and active interference with her territorial activities, while her tolerance for distant human presence, combined with aggressive responses to close approach, demonstrated that coexistence boundaries could be established and maintained through consistent behavioral communication that educated human observers about acceptable interaction protocols without requiring physical confrontation or territorial abandonment. The scientific research opportunities that her continental presence provided enabled paleontologists and behavioral biologists to gather unprecedented data about Tyrannosaurus capabilities and intelligence through observation of natural behaviors that had never been documented during captivity or controlled exhibition circumstances, while her cooperation with non-intrusive research activities demonstrated that authentic scientific inquiry could be conducted without compromising her territorial security or freedom of movement within established domain boundaries that she continued to defend against any threats to her sovereignty. Her impact on regional ecosystems during her continental residence created both positive and negative environmental effects that required careful assessment by wildlife biologists who recognized that apex predator reintroduction could provide ecological benefits through population control of herbivore species that had reached unsustainable density levels in areas where natural predation had been eliminated through historical hunting pressure and habitat modification, while her presence also created displacement effects that forced some species to modify traditional territorial and migration patterns. The legal challenges that arose from her territorial establishment within protected wilderness areas revealed gaps in environmental law that had never addressed the rights and responsibilities associated with genetically resurrected species whose legal status remained ambiguous under existing wildlife protection statutes, while court decisions that ultimately recognized her territorial claims as legitimate, established, important precedents for dinosaur legal rights that would influence future policy development regarding human-dinosaur coexistence and territorial sovereignty questions. Her physical condition during the prime years of her continental adaptation reflected the benefits of natural exercise and environmental stimulation that exceeded anything she had experienced during island existence, while hunting wild prey across vast territories, provided muscle development and cardiovascular conditioning that enhanced her capabilities beyond anything that tropical island predation had demanded, creating improvements in strength, speed, and endurance that demonstrated the advantages of genuine freedom over controlled exhibition environments, regardless of their apparent luxury or spaciousness. The winter survival skills that she developed during her continental residence included behavioral modifications for conserving energy during periods of reduced prey availability and extreme weather conditions, while her ability to locate shelter and maintain body temperature during blizzard conditions demonstrated that genetic programming included cold weather adaptations that had been dormant during tropical existence but could be activated when environmental circumstances required physiological responses to temperature ranges that exceeded anything she had previously experienced. Her establishment of cache sites where surplus kills could be preserved for future consumption during lean periods revealed strategic planning capabilities that extended beyond immediate hunting success to include resource management, approaches that could sustain apex predator metabolism during seasonal variations in prey availability. While these food storage behaviors demonstrated understanding of decomposition processes and preservation conditions that allowed efficient utilization of hunting success during periods of resource abundance to support survival during prudess, environmental challenges, the territorial marking behaviors that she adapted for continental environments included scent communication systems that could convey information across distances that exceeded anything that island territories had required, while her systematic establishment of boundary markers and communication posts created a network of territorial control that provided security and resource management capabilities across hunting grounds that encompassed areas larger than entire island domains she had claimed during her previous decades of tropical sovereignty. Her successful integration into North American ecosystems during the 4 years of continental wandering transformed her from displaced island refugee to respected continental sovereign whose territorial claims had been established through demonstration of capabilities and intelligence that commanded recognition from both human authorities and other apex predators, while her adaptation to continental existence proved that genetic resurrection could indeed produce creatures capable of establishing authentic relationships with environments that bore no resemblance to their original evolutionary circumstances, yet could support magnificent predators whose wisdom and strength honored both their ancient heritage and their individual achievements in overcoming every challenge that tested their worthiness. To claim dominion over territories that had never known such rulers, but would benefit from their presence and protection. The queen who awaited whatever new challenges might arise had been transformed through continental adaptation into something that exceeded both her island achievements and her genetic programming, having proven that intelligence and determination could overcome any environmental barrier while establishing territorial sovereignty that honored the majesty of her species and the dignity of her individual accomplishments through decades of successful adaptation to circumstances that had tested every resource of capability and character that evolution and genetic enhancement could provide for achieving authentic greatness that transcended the artificial boundaries between natural and created life forms. In the summer of 2022, when the world had grown accustomed to the presence of dinosaurs as permanent additions to continental ecosystems that operated according to ecological principles that no previous generation had been required to understand or accommodate, within environmental management strategies, The emergence of a global crisis that threatened the foundations of agriculture and food security drew Rexy into confrontations that would test her capabilities against artificial threats that exceeded anything she had encountered during 4 decades of territorial sovereignty and environmental adaptation. The genetically engineered locusts that began devastating crop production across vast agricultural regions represented the ultimate expression of corporate warfare conducted through biological weapons that had been designed to destroy the economic foundations of civilization while positioning their creators as the sole source of solutions to crises that they had deliberately manufactured. Her involvement in the events that would culminate in the destruction of Biosyn Corporation's research facilities began not through any conscious decision to participate in human conflicts, but as a natural consequence of territorial instincts that could not tolerate the presence of artificial organisms whose behavior patterns violated every principle of ecological balance that had governed her understanding of proper environmental relationships during decades of successful territorial management across both island and continental ecosystems that had achieved stability through predator-prey interactions based upon natural selection rather than corporate manipulation. The swarms of genetically modified insects that invaded her continental territories during their systematic destruction of agricultural production carried chemical signatures and behavioral characteristics that her enhanced sensory capabilities recognized as fundamentally artificial rather than products of natural evolutionary development, while their coordinated attack patterns and selective targeting of specific plant species revealed strategic intelligence that exceeded anything that natural insect populations could achieve through instinctive behavioral responses that had been shaped by millions of years of environmental pressure rather than laboratory programming designed to serve commercial objectives. Her initial encounters with these artificial swarms demonstrated that her territorial defense capabilities extended beyond conventional predator-prey relationships to encompass protection of environmental integrity against technological threats that operated according to principles that violated natural law through systematic destruction of ecological relationships that had been established through evolutionary processes spanning geological ages rather than corporate planning sessions focused upon profit maximization, without regard for environmental consequences that could threaten the survival of entire ecosystems. The tracking systems that monitored her movements during this period revealed that her response to the locust invasion included systematic investigation of swarm origins and behavioral patterns that suggested understanding that these artificial organisms represented coordinated attacks upon environmental stability rather than natural population fluctuations that could be addressed through conventional predatory responses. While her methodical elimination of locust concentrations demonstrated tactical intelligence that could distinguish between natural and artificial threats based upon behavioral analysis rather than simple prey recognition. Her journey toward the Biosyn research facility in the Italian Dolomites was motivated not by any understanding of corporate conflicts or international politics, but by territorial instincts that demanded investigation and elimination of threats whose artificial nature posed existential challenges to natural ecosystems that she had sworn to protect through her position as apex predator, whose responsibilities extended beyond individual survival to encompass environmental stewardship that honored both her evolutionary heritage and her accumulated experience with technological dangers. The mountainous terrain that surrounded Biosyn's headquarters provided her with tactical advantages that she had learned to exploit during her years of continental adaptation. while the facility's location within what corporate documents described as a dinosaur sanctuary created jurisdictional complications that demonstrated how human legal systems had failed to address the fundamental questions of territorial sovereignty that arose when apex predators, whose rights predated any human legislation, encountered technological threats that required immediate response rather than bureaucratic deliberation. Her arrival at the research complex coincided with the convergence of multiple storylines that had been developing independently across different corporate and governmental institutions, as her pursuit of artificial threats intersected with human efforts to address crises that had been created through genetic engineering programs, whose scope and dangers had exceeded even the most pessimistic assessments of technological risks that regulatory authorities had attempted to monitor and control through conventional oversight mechanisms that proved inadequate when confronted with biological weapons designed to evade detection. The Giganotosaurus that served as Biosyn's ultimate security measure represented corporate confidence that artificial enhancement could overcome natural authority through genetic modifications that had been designed to exceed the capabilities of any naturally evolved predator, including enhanced Tyrannosaurus specimens whose combat experience and territorial dominance had been proven through decades of successful defense against every challenger that had questioned their sovereignty over contested domains. Her first encounter with this genetically modified rival revealed that Biosyn's enhancement programs had indeed succeeded in creating a predator whose size and strength exceeded her own physical capabilities, while the artificial intelligence and programmed aggression that had been incorporated into the creature's genetic structure provided tactical advantages that had never been tested against opponents whose combat experience had been earned through authentic territorial conflicts rather than laboratory programming designed to optimize performance according to theoretical combat scenarios. The battle that erupted between these apex predators represented more than territorial competition, but embodied the fundamental conflict between natural authority that had been earned through evolutionary excellence and artificial enhancement that had been assembled through corporate arrogance that assumed technological superiority could overcome wisdom that had been accumulated through millions of years of natural selection, pressure, operating according to environmental principles that transcended any human understanding of predatory effectiveness. Her initial disadvantage in this confrontation stemmed from the size differential that Biosyn's genetic modifications had created. While the enhanced predator's artificial intelligence allowed it to analyze her combat strategies and adapt tactical responses with computational efficiency that exceeded the intuitive tactical thinking that had characterized her previous victories over naturally evolved competitors whose behavioral patterns had been shaped by evolutionary pressure rather than laboratory programming designed to maximize combat effectiveness. The systematic destruction that accompanied their battle revealed that artificial enhancement had created an opponent whose territorial instincts had been perverted beyond anything that natural evolution had ever produced. As the Giganotosaurus demonstrated willingness to destroy environmental resources and infrastructure without regard for the ecological consequences that natural predators would have considered unacceptable violations of territorial stewardship responsibilities that were fundamental to apex predator psychology. The intervention of other creatures during the final phases of their confrontation demonstrated that her reputation as defender of natural order had earned recognition and support from species that might normally have remained neutral during territorial conflicts between apex predators, while the assistance provided by the Therizinosaurus revealed that herbivorous species possessed understanding of the broader implications of her struggle against artificial enhancement that threatened the ecological balance upon which all natural species depended for environmental stability. The cooperative tactics that emerged from this unprecedented alliance between natural predators and herbivorous species proved capable of overcoming even genetically enhanced opponents whose artificial advantages had been designed to provide superiority over individual challenges rather than coordinated responses that could exploit the behavioral limitations that artificial programming had failed to anticipate or prepare for through laboratory testing that had never addressed the possibility of interspecies cooperation against common threats. The death of the enhanced Giganotosaurus beneath the combined assault of natural species demonstrated that authentic evolutionary wisdom could indeed overcome artificial enhancement when circumstances allowed natural allies to coordinate their capabilities against threats that exceeded individual capacity to address through conventional territorial defense strategies. While the victory established her position as the acknowledged leader of natural forces that opposed technological threats to environmental integrity and ecological stability, her systematic investigation of Biosyn's research facilities following the elimination of their ultimate security measure revealed evidence of genetic engineering programs that had extended far beyond the publicly acknowledged research into agricultural applications, while the discovery of hybrid creature development programs and biological weapons research demonstrated that corporate genetic manipulation had achieved capabilities that posed existential threats to natural ecosystems through artificial organisms that had been designed to serve commercial objectives rather than environmental stability. The destruction of critical research data and genetic samples during her investigation of laboratory facilities was conducted with tactical intelligence that recognized the strategic importance of preventing future development of artificial organisms that could threaten environmental balance, while her selective elimination of specific technological systems demonstrated understanding of the relationship between research capabilities and corporate power that exceeded anything that previous estimates of dinosaur intelligence had attributed to Tyrannosaurus cognitive abilities. Her encounter with Dr. Henry Wu during the facility's destruction provided her with direct confrontation with the geneticist whose work had been responsible for both her own creation and the artificial threats that had required her intervention to protect natural ecosystems from technological dangers, while their final interaction revealed complex relationships between creator and creation that transcended simple predator-prey dynamics to encompass questions of responsibility and consequence that had characterized every stage of the genetic resurrection industry. Wu's death during the facility's collapse represented both justice for decades of genetic manipulation that had prioritized corporate profit over environmental responsibility and symbolic elimination of the scientific arrogance that had assumed technological enhancement could improve upon evolutionary designs that had achieved perfection through millions of years of natural selection pressure, operating according to environmental principles that honored both individual capability and ecological sustainability. The reunion with other Tyrannosaurus specimens during the aftermath of Biosyn's destruction revealed that she was not alone among her species in having achieved freedom and territorial establishment within modern ecosystems, while her interactions with buck and doe from the original Isla Nublar populations demonstrated that genetic siblings could indeed recognize family relationships that transcended the artificial circumstances of their creation and the decades of separation that had followed their dispersal from corporate control. The establishment of cooperative relationships with other apex predators within the sanctuary valley that had been created from Biocene's former research facility demonstrated that territorial competition could be suspended when circumstances required collaborative responses to environmental challenges that exceeded individual capabilities. While the successful integration of multiple predator populations within shared territories proved that natural intelligence could develop social structures that had never existed during their species' original evolutionary history, her role as senior matriarch within this newly established predator community reflected both her combat experience and her accumulated wisdom regarding human technological threats, while her leadership in developing territorial arrangements that allowed multiple apex predator families to coexist within overlapping territories established precedents for dinosaur social organization that had never been observed during previous research into prehistoric behavioral patterns and territorial management strategies. The protection that international law provided for the Sanctuary Valley following its designation as a protected dinosaur preserve ensured that her territorial claims would be recognized and defended by governmental authorities whose legal frameworks had evolved to acknowledge dinosaur rights and territorial sovereignty as legitimate interests that deserved protection from commercial exploitation and technological interference, while the establishment of legal precedents for dinosaur self-governance created foundations for future development of interspecies cooperation agreements. Her adaptation to sanctuary life during the months following Biocene's destruction revealed that communal territorial management could indeed provide advantages that exceeded individual sovereignty when properly structured to respect both individual capabilities and collective environmental responsibilities. While her successful integration into multi-species social structures demonstrated cognitive flexibility that allowed modification of territorial instincts that had been developed through decades of solitary dominance to accommodate collaborative approaches to ecosystem management. The medical treatment that she received for injuries sustained during her battle with the enhanced Giganotosaurus provided her with direct experience of beneficial human technology that had been developed to serve dinosaur welfare rather than corporate profit, while her cooperation with veterinary procedures demonstrated that authentic relationships between species could be established when human activities were guided by respect for dinosaur intelligence and autonomy, rather than assumptions of technological superiority over natural capabilities. The research programs that were established to study dinosaur behavior and intelligence within the sanctuary environment provided scientific institutions with unprecedented opportunities to gather data about prehistoric capabilities through observation of natural social interactions rather than controlled laboratory conditions that had characterized previous research into dinosaur psychology and territorial management, while her participation in non-intrusive research activities demonstrated that scientific inquiry could be conducted without compromising dinosaur dignity or freedom of movement. The educational programs that brought students and researchers to observe sanctuary operations under carefully controlled conditions created opportunities for human learning that honored dinosaur territorial requirements while providing educational experiences that could improve understanding of prehistoric intelligence and social capabilities that had been underestimated by previous scientific research based upon fossil evidence rather than observation of living specimens operating according to their own environmental preferences and territorial arrangements. Her influence upon younger Tyrannosaurus specimens within the sanctuary community established mentorship relationships that had never been documented during previous research into dinosaur social behavior, while her transmission of tactical knowledge and territorial management skills to the next generation of apex predators ensured that her accumulated wisdom would continue to guide dinosaur responses to environmental challenges and technological threats long after her individual territorial sovereignty had ended through natural succession processes. The creature who had achieved ultimate victory over both natural and artificial challenges, while establishing herself as the acknowledged matriarch of a multi-species community that operated according to principles that honored both individual capabilities and collective environmental responsibilities, represented the fulfillment of evolutionary potential that genetic resurrection had made possible through technologies that had been perverted by corporate greed, but could serve magnificent purposes when guided by respect for natural wisdom and authentic concern for environmental sustainability that transcended any commercial, objective, or technological demonstration of human superiority over forces that had shaped life on Earth for millions of years before human civilization had emerged to complicate natural relationships through artificial interventions that had consistently produced consequences exceeding human ability to predict or control through conventional technological solutions. In the years that followed her triumph over corporate genetic manipulation and the establishment of the Biosyn Valley as a protected sanctuary, where creatures from the ancient world could live according to natural principles rather than human commercial objectives, Rexy experienced the profound satisfaction that comes to those who have achieved not merely individual success, but recognition as the wise elder whose accumulated experience and proven capabilities command respect across species boundaries that had never before been bridged through authentic leadership based upon demonstrated wisdom rather than artificial authority, imposed through technological dominance or institutional power structures that ignored the legitimate rights of beings whose consciousness and territorial instincts deserved acknowledgement regardless of their origins. The sanctuary that had been created from the ruins of corporate ambition provided her with territories that exceeded anything she had claimed during her decades of island sovereignty, while the legal protections that international agreements had established around the preserve ensured that her territorial rights would be defended by governmental authorities, whose recognition of dinosaur autonomy represented unprecedented evolution in environmental law and interspecies. Relationships that had previously been governed by assumptions of human superiority over natural forces that operated according to principles far older than any civilization that mortals had constructed. Her role as matriarch of the valley's apex predator community required diplomatic skills that she had never needed to develop during her years of solitary dominance, as the presence of buck and doe from the original Site B populations created family relationships that had been impossible during the decades when corporate disasters had scattered Tyrannosaurus specimens across different continents and ecosystems where individual survival had taken precedence over social connections that genetic siblings might have maintained under more stable environmental conditions that allowed natural behavioral patterns to develop without constant threats from human interference or technological manipulation. The establishment of territorial boundaries that accommodated multiple apex predator families within overlapping hunting grounds demanded strategic thinking that went beyond individual resource acquisition to encompass collaborative management of prey populations and environmental resources that could sustain a predator community whose combined metabolic requirements exceeded anything that natural ecosystems had ever been required to support during the original age of dinosaurs, when geographic separation and population densities had prevented such concentrations of large carnivores from developing within single territorial systems. Her successful negotiation of these complex social arrangements demonstrated cognitive capabilities that exceeded every previous estimate of Tyrannosaurus intelligence, while her ability to establish hierarchical relationships based upon earned respect rather than simple physical dominance revealed that her accumulated experience and proven wisdom provided authority that transcended the size advantages that Buck possessed through genetic modifications that had enhanced his physical capabilities beyond her own dimensions, yet could not match the tactical intelligence and environmental knowledge that 4 decades of territorial sovereignty had provided. The younger Tyrannosaurus specimens that had been born within the sanctuary environment during the years following its establishment looked to her for guidance in developing hunting strategies and territorial management skills that their parents could not provide because their own experience had been shaped by captivity and artificial environments that bore no resemblance to the complex social ecosystem that was evolving within the protected valley, where natural behavioral patterns were being allowed to develop without corporate interference or exhibition requirements that had previously prevented authentic predator communities from forming. Her mentorship of these juvenile apex predators created educational relationships that had never been documented during previous research into dinosaur social behavior, while her transmission of tactical knowledge regarding both natural hunting techniques and responses to technological threats ensured that future generations would possess the wisdom necessary to maintain territorial independence despite whatever corporate or governmental challenges might arise from human institutions that had not yet fully accepted the reality of dinosaur rights and environmental sovereignty that transcended any legal frameworks that mortals might attempt to impose. The seasonal patterns that governed sanctuary operations reflected her understanding that sustainable ecosystem management required coordination with natural cycles that had been disrupted during the corporate period when artificial feeding schedules and exhibition requirements had prevented prey populations from developing the behavioral patterns that would be necessary for long-term ecological stability within environments that were meant to operate according to natural principles rather than entertainment. Industry demands for spectacular predatory displays that served tourist satisfaction rather than environmental integrity. Her adaptation to communal territorial management revealed psychological flexibility that allowed modification of behavioral patterns that had been developed through decades of solitary sovereignty to accommodate collaborative approaches to resource distribution and territorial defense that provided advantages exceeding individual capabilities, while maintaining the authority structure that recognized her senior status within a predator hierarchy that operated according to earned respect rather than artificial ranking systems imposed by human research programs or exhibition planning that had never understood the authentic social dynamics that could develop among apex predators when given freedom to establish natural relationships. The research programs that were established to study dinosaur behavior within the sanctuary environment provided scientific institutions with unprecedented opportunities to gather data about prehistoric social capabilities through non-intrusive observation of authentic community interactions, rather than controlled laboratory conditions that had characterized previous attempts to understand dinosaur psychology, and territorial management through artificial scenarios that bore no resemblance to the complex environmental relationships that were developing within the protected valley where multiple species had achieved genuine coexistence. Her cooperation with these research activities demonstrated that scientific inquiry could indeed be conducted without compromising dinosaur dignity or territorial autonomy when human researchers possessed sufficient respect for prehistoric intelligence and social structures that had evolved beyond anything that fossil evidence had suggested was possible. during the original Mesozoic era, when geographic constraints and environmental pressures had prevented the kind of interspecies cooperation that was becoming routine within sanctuary boundaries where artificial barriers had been eliminated. The medical facilities that had been established within the sanctuary to provide veterinary care for aging apex predators created opportunities for her to receive treatment for the accumulated injuries and physical wear that 4 decades of territorial sovereignty had inflicted upon her magnificent frame, while her willing participation in therapeutic procedures revealed that authentic relationships between species could transcend the predator-prey dynamics that had characterized most previous human-dinosaur interactions when corporate objectives had prevented development of mutual respect and understanding. The gradual changes in her physical condition that accompanied advancing age were compensated by the environmental stability and social support that sanctuary life provided, while her accumulated wisdom regarding territorial management and threat assessment made her increasingly valuable as an advisor and mentor whose guidance could prevent younger predators from making tactical errors that might threaten their individual survival or the collective security of the brooding predator community that had achieved unprecedented success in establishing sustainable relationships with both prey populations and human authorities. Her influence upon sanctuary policies and territorial arrangements extended beyond mere apex predator concerns to encompass environmental stewardship that protected the interests of all species within the preserve, while her understanding of ecological balance that had been developed through decades of successful territorial management provided guidance for resource allocation, decisions that maintained prey population stability while ensuring adequate nutrition for the predator community, whose metabolic requirements demanded careful coordination to prevent overexploitation of available resources. The diplomatic relationships that she established with herbivorous species within the sanctuary created unprecedented cooperation between predator and prey populations that had never been observed during natural evolutionary history, while these peaceful interactions during non-hunting periods demonstrated that intelligent species could indeed develop complex social structures that transcended simple ecological relationships when environmental stability and mutual respect provided foundations for authentic interspecies communication and collaborative territorial management. Her role in establishing protocols for human visitation and research access ensured that sanctuary operations would maintain the privacy and territorial security that apex predator psychology demanded, while allowing educational, scientific activities that could improve human understanding of dinosaur capabilities and environmental requirements that needed to be respected for successful long-term coexistence between species whose evolutionary backgrounds had never included any significant interaction until genetic resurrection had made such relationships both possible and necessary. The legacy preservation programs that documented her tactical knowledge and territorial management strategies created permanent records that would enable future generations of both dinosaurs and humans to benefit from the wisdom that she had accumulated through successful adaptation to every challenge that 4 decades of unprecedented circumstances had presented. While these educational resources would serve as foundations for continued development of interspecies, cooperation, and environmental stewardship that honored both individual capabilities and collective responsibilities for ecosystem maintenance, her establishment of training programs for younger apex predators included instruction in both natural hunting techniques and responses to technological threats that corporate genetic engineering had made permanent features of modern ecosystems, while her emphasis upon environmental responsibility and territorial stewardship ensured that future predator communities would maintain the ethical standards that had made sanctuary operations successful despite the complex challenges that arose from managing apex predator populations within artificial boundaries that required constant diplomatic balance between individual territorial instincts and collective survival requirements. The international recognition that she received as the world's senior dinosaur matriarch reflected growing governmental and institutional acknowledgement that prehistoric intelligence and accumulated experience deserved respect, regardless of the artificial circumstances of genetic resurrection. While her influence upon environmental policy development demonstrated that authentic wisdom could transcend species boundaries when applied to challenges that required cooperation between different forms of consciousness for successful resolution of complex ecological and social problems. Her participation in international conferences and policy discussions through video communication systems that allowed her to contribute to decision-making processes without leaving sanctuary territories established precedents for dinosaur political participation that had never been contemplated during earlier phases of human-dinosaur relationships when corporate objectives had prevented recognition of prehistoric intelligence and autonomous decision-making capabilities that genetic resurrection had restored, along with physical characteristics and behavioral patterns. The peaceful coexistence that characterized her relationships with other apex predators within the sanctuary environment created stability that allowed all participants to focus upon environmental stewardship and community development, rather than territorial competition and resource conflicts that had been inevitable during earlier periods when corporate management had prevented natural social structures from developing through artificial separation and exhibition requirements that ignored fundamental psychological needs for authentic social interaction and collaborative territorial management. Her daily routines within the sanctuary reflected the satisfaction that comes from achieving harmony between individual capabilities and environmental responsibilities, while her continued growth in wisdom and understanding demonstrated that consciousness could indeed continue developing throughout extended lifespans, when circumstances provided security and intellectual stimulation that allowed exploration of philosophical and strategic questions that transcended immediate survival concerns to encompass broader considerations of environmental stewardship and interspecies cooperation. The respect that she commanded from human researchers and sanctuary staff reflected earned authority that had been established through demonstrated capabilities and consistent ethical behavior, rather than artificial hierarchy imposed through technological dominance. While her influence upon sanctuary policies ensured that dinosaur interests would be adequately represented in decisions that affected territorial arrangements and resource allocation within the preserve that had become home to the most successful interspecies community that had ever been established on Earth. The creature who had transformed from laboratory specimen to island sovereign to continental pioneer had achieved her final evolution as wise elder whose accumulated experience and proven wisdom provided guidance for challenges that exceeded individual capabilities while maintaining the dignity and authority that 4 decades of successful territorial sovereignty had established through victories over every form of opposition that had questioned her right to rule according to principles that honored both evolutionary heritage, individual achievement earned through intelligence, courage, and magnificent persistence that had proven worthy of the genetic enhancement that had made her superior to her natural ancestors in every measurable aspect of predatory excellence. Her legacy, as the queen who had defended natural order against artificial threats while establishing the foundations for authentic interspecies cooperation, would endure long after her individual reign had ended, while the wisdom that she had accumulated through unprecedented challenges would continue guiding dinosaur communities and human institutions toward environmental relationships that honored both individual consciousness and collective responsibility for maintaining the ecological balance that made sustainable coexistence possible between species whose evolutionary backgrounds had never prepared them for the complex social arrangements that genetic resurrection had made both necessary and potentially beneficial for all participants, willing to embrace cooperation over domination as the organizing principle for planetary environmental stewardship. And so we reach the end of our journey with the queen who transformed from laboratory creation to legend, from captive curiosity to the undisputed matriarch of her kind. In the protected valleys where she now reigns, Rexy stands as testament to the resilience of life itself, proof that even artificial creations can achieve authentic majesty when given the freedom to become what nature intended, through intelligence, courage, and the magnificent persistence that carried her through 4 decades of unprecedented challenges that tested every aspect of her capabilities. Her roar, which once echoed through abandoned theme parks and corporate boardrooms as a sound of terror and chaos, now calls across sanctuary valleys as the voice of authority earned through survival, wisdom gained through struggle, and dignity maintained despite humanity's attempts to reduce her to mere commodity. From the amber that preserved her genetic heritage through 65 million years of silence, through laboratories that granted her second life, to the valleys where she has found her truest home, her story reminds us that some forces in nature transcend the boundaries that mortals seek to impose upon them. Rest now, fellow survivor, knowing that somewhere in protected wilderness, the queen still walks her domain with the majesty that time could not diminish and human ambition could not contain. Let her eternal presence guard your sleep as she guards the ancient legacy of her kind forever.